Hey everybody, welcome to Bank to the Future live episode 101. We're actually going to be doing the 101 of crypto lending due to the disaster that's happened over the last few months in the crypto lending market. So today is all about the future of crypto lending. We have been off at BF Live because for the last year, we've really been in license application mode. And we're at the end of some of those license applications. So we really hope to be making some important announcements over the coming weeks and months ahead. If you didn't see it, we've been making a few announcements after my trip to go see the president of El Salvador, and also a recent acquisition that we've completed on SALT lending, pending definitive terms and also regulatory approval. And so we thought it would be appropriate, really, with the crypto lending market in such disarray, to cover a first principles look at what I think the future of crypto lending looks like. So I prepared a few slides, and as always, I like to go back in history as a complete money geek and look at what we have already learned from the traditional markets so that we can apply it to hard money in the Bitcoin-backed crypto lending markets as well. So the way we're going to do is slightly different. Normally in the past, we did our half hour and then we did half an hour Q&A using Slido. Well, today we're going to be using Twitter Spaces. So after this, I'm going to be interacting with you. It's a lot more interactive than Slido, where you can come on and ask a few questions. I've been doing a lot of those recently and they've been uploaded to the Simon Dixon YouTube channel. But now that we are getting ready for our next set of companies and pitches, the last update we did was during the Luna crisis. And since then, there has been the crypto lending platform crisis as well. So I'm just going to check that my slides are working, and I'm going to share my slides. So let's come off camera. And Zod, can you see my slides?
Yep, I can see it. Can everyone else?
Awesome. Okay. All right. Well, everyone will let me know if it's not showing up. Let's jump straight in. So as I said, this is on the future of the crypto lending markets. And I like to go back to first principles. Now, remember, the last time that we had a financial system like the Bitcoin financial system that was built upon hard money was pretty much towards the end of the 19th century. And we had a lot of innovation throughout the 20th century. And those lessons teach us a lot. And the first lesson that led to really the whole financial crisis debt cycle that we're in right now was a switch from hard money to fiat money. I call it the hard money to fiat swap. And it consisted of a few events. The first events that really cemented it, as we said, the financial system, all fiat currency was backed by gold, and banks were just simply a safety deposit box for your gold. And then they started to issue receipts for your gold. And as they started to issue receipts for their gold, we started to have the birth of the fiat currency system through several events, whereby if you tried to get your gold from that receipt, there was not enough gold to cover those receipts in what we call credit money. Credit money is simply more money existing than actually backs it up. And really it accumulated into the 1907 panic. In the 1907 panic, we had United Copper, where banks were trying to corner the market in United Copper. They were all lending money from the depositors and lending more and collateralizing in order to invest in the stock market to try and corner the market and manipulate the price of copper. That went wrong, and when it went wrong, it led to a panic on several banks when the Knickerbocker Trust essentially went insolvent as a result of the leverage. And then that had an effect on the different banks, and everybody started coming to try and claim in their receipts for gold. Essentially, there was no cash, there was no gold. Everybody tried to get their notes. The notes didn't exist, and it ended to a mass run on lots of different banks. And so this fella here in the top right, called JP Morgan, he came along and said to all these different banks and said, hey, I've got cash, I've got gold, I'll lend you some money to give confidence in the bank, but in exchange for that, I would want to buy your company for pennies on the dollars for almost completely free. And JP Morgan became the powerhouse, and JP Morgan became the lender of last resort and started to monopolize the banking industry in the United States. That has recently been used, and we'll go through that in the recent markets when we do the parallels. Then using this power, in 1910, a bunch of bankers and politicians met on Jekyll Island, and they decided to put together a replacement for JP Morgan called the Federal Reserve. And so they implemented a way of getting taxpayers and central banks to control the system to print fiat currency when this is needed so that you pay through inflation, and have the government back the system so that you pay through tax as well. That was designed in 1910, and then in 1913 it was implemented with the implementation of the Federal Reserve Act, using what they learned from the Bank of England, which learned from the Dutch Empire and the British Empire, and this launched the beginning of the American Empire and the dollarization of the world as there was a war. And in that war, in 1914, we had World War I. At the end of the war in 1918, it was negotiated at the Paris Versailles Treaty that the losers, Germany and its allies, would have to pay America and its allies, which consisted of Russia, America, UK, and they had to pay the equivalent today of $442 billion in gold, of which most of it, with the fall of the British Empire and the rise of the US Empire, with the US funding much of the military and being less affected, ended up with much of that gold in the Federal Reserve, so that the US became the most important economy. Several innovations came through, and it was all backed by gold at the Federal Reserve. Then it entered into a bull market. We had several crashes in between, entered into the Great Depression of the 1930s, when everyone was speculating in the epic 1929 crash. And in 1933, the Roosevelt, the president at the time, introduced several reforms, one of them which was FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which said that in order to prevent more bank runs like happened in the 1930s, we've got the Federal Reserve, but now we need deposit insurance as well. And so that was a bunch of banks that would come together for the system. But if the insurance didn't cover the banks that were going bankrupt at the time or insolvent at the time, then it would be backed by the US the US credit rating and the United States government. And essentially there was the foundation of the complete fiat currency to gold money swap. All the gold ended up in the coffers at the Federal Reserve. They made it illegal for Americans to own it. They had to hand it in for initially $20 and then $35 of banknotes. And all the gold ended up in the Federal Reserve, and they successfully swapped everything for fiat currency, essentially, backed by the lender of last resort, the Federal Reserve, and deposit insurance, FDIC. Innovation one. So that was the setup in order to prevent some of the situations that are happening in the current crypto lending market. So what was innovation number two? Well, innovation number two was to take all of that and lay the foundation of the government bailout structure so that the taxpayer could pay. So the Federal Reserve would create new money, and the banks had the license to create more money than they had, which would cause inflation. And then the governments could bail out the system, creating this thing in economics we call a moral hazard. And a moral hazard is essentially when you know that the government can back it, you can take higher risks, and you can take higher risks based upon the belief that the government will bail you out. So how did they do that? Well, in 1944, after the Second World War, the monetary system needed to be renegotiated. So John Maynard Keynes, which was a British economist, came along and said we should create a global digital currency called Bancor, and that was rejected. And in favor for that, the US government and Hoover managed to negotiate that everyone would come off the gold standard and simply have a dollar standard. And the dollar would remain because it had all the gold, or a big supply of the gold, and it had the fact that it was illegal to own gold in America. They would promise to back their dollars by a fixed amount of gold, and it went to the next design of the system. So now everybody came off the gold standard, convertible to dollars, and dollars promised to be backed by gold. The problem is that started to decrease the gold supply of the Federal Reserve. So in 1971, in order to save the system as we started to enter into the 1970s inflationary period, the gold standard was removed, and President Nixon said, in order to save America, everybody hand in your gold, and it's going to be, we're going to remove the gold standard as well, and we're going to move to a full fiat debt-backed standard. Why can we do that? Because we've got the Federal Reserve, which is the lender of last resort. Everyone can pay through inflation. And we also have the government bailout, FDIC, as well, backed by the credit rating of the US government. So those that held deposits can have some kind of guarantee. So let's remove the gold standard, and banks go out, lend as much as possible. Let's create real estate bubbles, and let's get everyone's pensions moving and the stock market moving and recover the markets. Then that led to a massive bubble in the real estate markets, massive amounts of debt being printed, and banks and savings and loans organizations getting ever more reckless based upon the government bailout, which resulted in FSLIC that you may not have heard of. You probably heard of FDIC, which guarantees the large commercial banks, but FSLIC was the guarantor of the deposits of the savings and loans. Now, there was a savings and loan crisis because of stagflation throughout the 70s and 80s. Interest rates were put up, were pretty high. And that was due to some of the Volcker reforms that was trying to become more, less reckless. But it led to the savings and loan crisis. And we saw for the first time that an organization like FDIC can actually go bankrupt. FSLIC, went bankrupt because it was insuring more than it could handle. And when those banks simultaneously went bust, essentially the government bailout had to be called in, and taxpayers paid, and it cost taxpayers hundreds of billions of dollars in order to bail out the system. And FSLIC was bailed out by FDIC. And if you look at FDIC today, it can only handle approximately 1% of bank deposits that it's actually insuring. So if more than one major bank goes bust, it doesn't cover the insurance, and you have to move to taxpayers paying through the government bailout. So obviously this then led to our next bull market, where investment banks came along and they innovated how to sell lots and lots of mortgages to your pension. That led to a stock market boom. It led to the subprime crisis, where banks could just sell it off those mortgages, sell it to your pension and hedge funds. And we ended up with the Lehman Brothers situation. So September 2008, Lehman Brothers goes into Chapter 11 bankruptcy. And Chapter 11, again, we've learned from this, is essentially a restructuring, reorganization process that many of the crypto lending institutions are experiencing right now. And so within Chapter 11, there was some real shenanigans because of the government bailout process, where JP Morgan, the winner of the 1907 panic, essentially received a loan and a government lender of last resort loan from the Federal Reserve, because they designed part of the system. And the Federal Reserve then started using that bailout money in order to acquire public stock companies to the detriment of shareholders that owned companies like Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns. So the Federal Reserve decided not to bail out Lehman Brothers or Bear Stearns, but instead it went into Chapter 11 bankruptcy, which is a good process. It means that you let the free market determine how to repair it. But JP Morgan, being JP Morgan, instead borrowed money from the Fed, who received a bailout, and then used it to acquire Lehman Brothers for pennies on the dollar, with Bear Stearns rather. And then Nomura Bank and Barclays Bank ended up being the beneficiary of Lehman Brothers, who were also given government bailouts as well. So that was the 2008 system, was more of a free market solution, but funded by government bailouts where they were picking the winners and losers. But the Chapter 11 reorg was one of the biggest reorgs in financial history. Essentially, the shareholders in Barclays and Nomura benefited from the demise of Lehman Brothers, and the loaning of the government bailouts was all that made it slightly corrupt. Then we had Innovation 3, so that recovered the market slightly, but the hangover from that led to the equity bail-in. So I'm just trying to outline from history the different models so that we can understand what potentially comes next in these markets. So Innovation 3 was the equity bail-in. And this came about from the Greek debt crisis. The European debt crisis led to a really European ECB bailout that had a lot of austerity measures, but led to a 50% haircut in those that owned Greek debt and that were lending money to the Greek government. Then that took a couple of years to see its way through to one of the largest holders of Greek debt, or one of the most exposed rather than largest, which was the Cypriot bank. So in 2013, there was about $120 billion of deposits at these Cypriot banks, and about 60 billion of it came from wealthy people in Russia that had formed an alliance with Cyprus due to some of the regulatory nature of the Cypriot financial system. And so that was looked upon as an opportunity to bail in the bank and make the shareholders take the 50% haircut and make those that had over $100,000 in deposit shareholders in the banks. And so this was the bank bail-in model. Again, it was a combination of crony capitalism combined with political, but at least used a free market solution for the 2013 bank bail-in. So those are the different things that made up, and obviously that then led to innovation number 4, which is digital hard sound money. In 2008, obviously we had the Bitcoin white paper, and then after the Bitcoin white paper in 2010, Bank to the Future launched and created a securities business whereby people could invest in Bitcoin companies that made Bitcoin more useful so that people could trade. And we started to change and look at how we could rebuild the system based upon digital hard sound money. Now, the Bitcoin was created as a way for people to own their own money, spend their own money, and have a hard money fixed supply and a fixed emission. So then we started funding many of the different companies by allowing the Bitcoiners to invest in the equity of many in the companies that built our industry. And we built out our secondary market so that people could pre-IPO look at trading those as well. And this led to Innovation 5 during the Bitcoin bailout model. The Bitcoin bailout model was really as a result of 2014 when Mt. Gox, Mark Capellas, bought an exchange from the creator of the XRP cryptocurrency Ripple that had 80,000 Bitcoin missing from it when he bought it without the disclosure. And then that led to a bit of a Ponzi scheme where everybody had balances, but it didn't. Those were essentially credit money, just like in the 1907 panic. And there was several hacks and incompetent practices due to be the first mover. And also another exchange called BTCE, which was processing many of the exchanges from Bitcoin that came off the Silk Road, which was originally, ironically, arrested in Greece more recently, where he was hanging out after the Cypriot financial crisis. And in 2014, essentially 850,000 approximately Bitcoins went into a Japanese bankruptcy proceedings because they only had about 200 and 250,000 Bitcoins. I won't tell the whole story, but essentially they dollarized the claims, and it got bailed out by the fact that Bitcoin went on to become a multi-billion-dollar asset class and moved later into the $1 trillion. But 8 years later, several hard forks that led to additional money, it essentially got a Bitcoin bailout. People that valued their wealth in Bitcoin didn't receive all their Bitcoin back, but in dollar terms, it moved out of bankruptcy just to the increase in the price of Bitcoin. But it was a really, really bad, disastrous situation. Then we started to see different types of innovations around blockchain bailout. So innovation number 6 was when in 2016, a bunch of people that were part of the Ethereum Foundation separated off from the Ethereum Foundation and tried to create the first use case for Ethereum, which was claiming that you could have a decentralized venture capital fund and therefore it was not a security because the community would be deciding through what was known as the DAO, the Decentralized Autonomous Organization. And in 2016, the whole thing blew up, it got hacked, and it was a disaster that led to hundreds of millions of dollars that had been invested in the DAO, causing a lot of the original creators of Ethereum to lose a lot of their ETH that they got from one of the most successful ICOs. Now, because of the people that were there, they were able to lobby the community and reverse the chain. And so they did a blockchain bailout, where essentially they left the old chain behind and called it Ethereum Classic and created a new chain that didn't contain the transactions that were invested in the DAO. And people started to sell their DAO tokens for pennies on the dollars, and there was an arbitrage there because everyone that had Ethereum ended up with Ethereum Classic, and we ended up with the first blockchain bailout, proving that because there is some kind of centralization with the Ethereum Foundation, that you can lobby it and you can reverse the chain, explaining the difference between Ethereum and Bitcoin and the DAO and the importance. And then this got attacked by the SEC, and they defined that these tokens are securities. And then that started into innovation number 7. So 2016 was a pretty eventful year. We went into the equity bail-in. So this is where Bitfinex, a company that I'm a shareholder in, they were hacked for 119,000 Bitcoins. Rather than following the Mt. Gox process, they essentially issued a token that was convertible into equity, and people could convert that token into equity on Bank to the Future. And they implemented a successful bail-in where the funds were dollarized. They bailed in, everybody ended up shareholders in Bitfinex, and the community recovered it through equity. They started trading again. The price of those shares went from a bottom of 30 cents to a peak of $16, and hundreds of millions of dollars in dividends and all the profits from the 2017 bull market was paid out to those shareholders. So that was really the first bail-in model that came from that. At the same time, we entered into, we went to a conference called Satoshi Roundtable, where a guy called Eric Voorhees, who was the first to be slapped for creating a Bitcoin-based security, and then the SEC saying that you can't do that when he funded Satoshi Dice, one of the first Bitcoin gambling sites, sat down with a gentleman called Sean Owen at a conference that I was at, a private conference. And the idea of being able to lock up your Bitcoin so that you could borrow against it was formed through a company called Salt Lending in 2016. And this was the creation of the collateralized lending model, where people, based upon hard money, could lock up their Bitcoin and they could over collateralize, i.e. they left more Bitcoin so that if the price crashed, you could borrow dollars, and then if it crashed, that collateral could be sold, and then on the other side, people could receive some yield in exchange for that, and the model was born. This led to the 2017 ICO bull market, where essentially companies started launching tokens. I invested in Salt at that time, and we had Celsius that came along and launched a token. BlockFi didn't, but it launched without a token. And also Voyager came along, and we had the growth of these markets. The problem was they kind of left regulations behind. They forgot about the securities part. So really that led to the SEC crackdown. They cracked down and chose Salt to crack down on, and they spent years and years acquiring the licenses, negotiating with the regulators around how to settle the situation. But the SEC let other companies grow really big without cracking down on them. We ended up the situation where regulators essentially picked the companies that they wanted to take down and let the other ones grow, and then come to the situation where we are now. So the final few slides I have before we go into the last part on the future is I presented this slide to many of the crypto lending platforms. I said in 2017 we had the ICO boom. That was cracked down by regulators, where they essentially tried to say all these tokens are securities. That led to the sideways market, but then we moved into the DeFi boom. I said that the DeFi boom, if it's done via these centralized companies, will lead to a DeFi crackdown, which corrected the market. Then you'd end up with these having to comply with securities laws. Then the centralized platforms came along, and you had the yield boom, where everyone was locking their money up in the yield platforms. And I said that this would lead to the yield crackdown as regulators decide and determine that these things are securities. And so the SEC then started investigating all those platforms. Then we learned about a couple of models, and I was forecasting back then, around about 2023, I don't think we'll have that now, in 2024, you probably have the next wave, which would be a securities boom market based upon these trends. So around about 2020 now, we started contacting Celsius, and we launched what we called the Retirement Plan B program, which was guiding people on how to diversify. You can go from the cycle of spending, savings, investing, and contribution, and the different buckets, and guiding people through that process. And we started to create a security law compliant version in partnership with Celsius. We spent a couple of years on that. Then suddenly 2022 came along, and we had what we covered in the last episode of BF Live, the Terra Luna crackdown. So then we start to get the lessons of what we look for the future of Bitcoin and crypto lending. So Terra was backed by essentially a token. And if that token became illiquid, then you had to sell that token. That would crash the token, and it started to depeg as people started to take advantage of the trade on that stable coin. There's no dollars backing the stable coin, and essentially $40 to $60 billion of value just disappeared in a really, really quick time frame. There were a couple of companies that were really exposed to that. One of those was 3 Arrows Capital, which was a hedge fund that had to take a huge hit. As interest rates up and Bitcoin started to crash too, the Luna had to sell all their Bitcoin in a rush. This created systemic risk in the collateral. Some of the trades they were taking on Grayscale started to reverse, and they ended up with a $2.8 billion that they owe to their people as they moved into bankruptcy. At the same time, we had FTX that came along and said, BlockFi is exposed to 3 Arrows Capital. Why don't we do the JP Morgan strategy? So Sam Bankman-Friedman came along and said, I'll be the JP Morgan. Let's lend to BlockFi and figure out how to acquire the company for pennies on the dollars. And BlockFi was negotiating with the SEC, and therefore had a fast track to get the SEC license and fix the securities part of their business. I'm going to be moving over to Twitter Spaces to take your questions right after this one. Got about another 5 minutes, so I'll probably be 3 minutes late over there. And so we saw the model of the 1907 model of JP Morgan being implemented to success, and BlockFi essentially is now FTX and has to get that securities license with the SEC, and they're filing their S1s right now. Voyager and Celsius moved into Chapter 11 bankruptcy, which means that they get the opportunity to do what Lehman Brothers did, which is reorg and find another company that might be able to take it on under either they can get a reorg and they can get that signed off by the courts as long as they can fix some of the things that we share, or it would have to be taken on by another company that had those assets. But this time, I think we should be fighting for not the FTX strategy, but issuing equity like the Cypriot bail-in model, where at least the victims that were haircut end up with equity in the companies that might be able to reopen and create a model a bit like the Bitfinex. So combining the 1907 model, but rather than one company ending up with everything, combining it with the bank bail-in model where the depositors and victims end up with the equity, and then combining it with the Bitfinex model where you can have a potential recovery through increase in value in that equity. And so that brings us to where we are today in 2022. In order to support that at Bank to the Future, we made a recent announcement that we have entered into a negotiation. We're finalizing the terms to a definitive agreement pending regulatory approval with Salt Lending because they've now settled with the regulator. The idea is by combining the work that we've been doing over the last 10 years in securities law compliance with the work that Salt Lending has been doing for the last 6 years in figuring out how to do the compliant and risk model in the lending market, you could end up with what I think the future of crypto lending looks like, as well as a solution for any of those reorgs if they can't get out of Chapter 11, so that we can try and create a similar scenario to what we successfully did in the past several times with the Bitfinex one. So the final section before we move over to Twitter Spaces, where we take your questions, is what does the future of crypto lending look like? Well, as I said, those companies that hold a lot of Bitcoin and a lot of ETH, I think if we end up with a situation where they move into liquidation, it's going to have a systemic nature on the rest of the market, and we'll enter into an extended bear market phase like we did with Mt. Gox, where a lot of those Bitcoin and ETH have to hit the market, and we end up with a lot of people that lose billions and billions of money in their life savings. Not a good result. So I believe that a reorg is something that we are going to have to see to avoid that scenario. Either they can do it themselves, or they can go into a company like BlockFi or Bank to the Future that has got the securities and lending side covered because they've been working on it. Obviously, FTX has acquired BlockFi. BlockFi haven't got the license yet, but they've got to do it in order to maintain some of their equity in what's happening with FTX. You also need to de-risk the model for the future from what we've learned. We've learned that stablecoins that are not backed by dollars don't make good collateral. It cost Binance over $1 billion, which fortunately they had enough in order to bail themselves out, but that could have systemic risk on everything else, like it did with 3 Hours Capital, that then had systemic risk on all the other institutions that were not over collateralizing. So the lesson is over collateralized and good collateral. Basing things on a very illiquid coin, like they did at Celsius in some cases, and like they did in Luna, can have really, really catastrophic effects on the bank run and solvency of that company. Ethereum has completed its merge. We'll see what happens with this, if there's any splits or anything after that, like with the DAO. And so it no longer really needs to fall into the lending model. It can, but it will probably move into the staking model. And so therefore, pristine collateral is really left with Bitcoin, where you've got to manage volatility risk, and the dollar-backed stable coins, one which is exposed to the US system and the other that is less exposed to the US system, that have different types of risks, so that you can basically, if the collateral goes wrong, you can back it by the dollars that back those stable coins. Then you can take all the other more exotic stuff and comply it with securities laws. And in securities laws, as we've been doing for the last decade, investors have to understand the risks. They can invest and they understand that they could lose all their money because they're taking higher risk. And you end up with all the disclosures and transparency that's required in order to take greater risk, and then you don't end up mixing your savings with your investing. And I'd like to point you to a couple of resources to understand how to manage those risks, because I believe the entire community next has to relearn. So yesterday on my YouTube channel, Simon Dixon, I released this video on how you as an individual can recover from financial disaster based upon going through the cycle of separating your spending money from your savings money, from your investing money to your contribution money. I'd love for everybody to check that video out if you haven't checked it out already, because that is where you can understand where this fits in your bucket when planning out your future strategy. I do not believe this is a good time to move away from the market. Obviously, that may be a choice that you do, but this is where genuine wealth is made from relearning, re-risking, and changing those regulatory structures to build the next wave of what this industry could look like through some of these reorgs as well. And investing in the industry during these times are the times when the maximum wealth is made, having been involved in this industry right from the beginning and seen those as well. So at Bank to the Future, we look to try and support those reorgs, try and create a solution that can allow for it and relearn and create the education that can support people in that relearning process. And so with that in mind, briefly, I'll go back to the camera, but I'm going to take as many questions as we can. Head over to my Twitter account at Simon Dixon Twit, and you will find an AMA there where you can join, and I'll be looking forward to interacting with you directly. Next week, in our next episode, a BF Live episode 102. Let's see if I can get the camera on. Okay. BF Live episode 102 will also be bringing in Sean from Salt Lending so that we can discuss many of the product opportunities when you combine both the compliant securities model with the compliant lending model, how that can have an impact on different types of investment products by combining both debt and equity and all the potential that comes from that in the future of this model. So we're going to pass that one over for the next episode of Bank to the Future Live. If you would like to get a notification for that, then please, if you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and share it with others that you think could learn from the last century of innovation in the traditional markets and how it applies to the future of the crypto lending markets. Share it with them. Subscribe to the Bank to the Future YouTube channel where we go over more content for investors. Hit that bell symbol and hit all, and you will get notified as we go live in the future. So now I'm going to head over in a couple of minutes to that Twitter space, and you can ask your questions and we'll interact on many of the exciting opportunities from this disastrous situation and how we turn that into something that supports the victims and really brings the next phase of growth to our industry. So I hope you enjoyed that. That's going to do it for episode 101 of Bank to the Future Live. I'll see you over on Twitter Spaces. Always remember, you're alive at one of the most interesting and exciting times in financial history. Some people have got really hurt. Others have done really well. And I want to make sure that you stay on the right side of that change and use this opportunity to rebuild from any kind of financial disaster that you may have experienced as well. So check out that video and I'll see you over on Twitter Spaces. Peace.
Respect to you all, love to you all. Hope you're doing okay. Hope you enjoyed the little presentation and tying in history. So you understand that although it feels like we're rebuilding everything in crypto, there's real in the past as we rebuild on digital hard sound money rather than a fiat-based Ponzi scheme. And we can learn from that as well. So if you'd like to ask a question on any of that, why don't you request to come up and I'll start putting some people up live and we can start interacting. So let me make Azad the co-host. Hey Azad, can you hear me okay? I've invited you to co-host. Hopefully you can see that.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, awesome. Okay. All right. Yeah, if anyone would like to ask any questions on the future of crypto lending, any of the things, I should also disclaim that there's certain things I can't say and I can't comment on in some of the specific companies. So I can comment on all publicly available information, but I can't comment on non-public information that I may be privy to due to the disclosure that I've been making. I'm a creditor, one of the top creditors in the Celsius platform. I'm a shareholder as well in Celsius. And I've under multiple agreements that I can't necessarily disclose with lots of different people involved in lots of different things within these reorg processes. So as do you want to start letting some people in and we can start taking some of the first questions? I think we got the Celsius loans guy coming through.
Okay, Celsius loans should be connected now.
Hey, thanks, Simon. Thanks, Azad, and thanks for hosting this space. Appreciate the time. And yep, totally understand about all NDAs and future. Simon, just want to ask you for how you see the future for Celsius retail loan users right now that owe to a bankrupt platform, with Celsius still sending out emails to people saying to wire in their principal as their loan matures. Just for people that have not been through a bankruptcy before, that would like out of this mess with their collateral, what would you say to those retail users that are just looking for some perspective or for some possible future solution? Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so thank you for that. And I believe that you're part of a Telegram group where everybody that has loans on Celsius can group together to try and coordinate. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct. And the link is in my bio.
Okay, cool. So if anyone has a loan with Celsius, they might want to, work, be in a community with other people that are in the same situation, and you can do that there. So again, the public information, non-public information. So I'll give you all the things that I can say based upon public information. Is that, and I think maybe you probably understand all the issues now because you're so close to it, but many people won't. The issue is that Celsius, like 3 Hours Capital, had a $2.8 billion hole, and the last balance sheet and coin report that Celsius gave publicly, so this is public information, they also had a $2.8 billion hole. So the distribution of that money when they don't have the money is breaking up into different groups. Some people believe that they have a claim over it because Celsius had a regulatory issue that meant that they had to move certain people into custody, and custody means that you're meant to own the money as the depositor legally. The reason that they're probably doing that, I speculate, is because they're claiming, and Kirkland, the lawyer, is claiming that all the money that people invested actually belongs to Celsius. So they can do a quick win by giving custody people their money back, which proves that everything else is theirs. Now, then comes to the next group of people, which is people that had loans with Celsius. They were collateralized. And legal arguments are coming along to saying, well, maybe they deserve to get the collateral out because if those are uncollateralized loans, they're not going to be worth too much, depending on what that collateral is as well. So more transparency needs to be given publicly around the collateral behind those loans so that people can assess the different types of situations. And I think it goes either one or two ways. Either those loans get backed by the full collateral, and some kind of negotiation can be had whereby earned customers are compensated, and the full collateral can go out and it can go to a new home. And that new home could be any platform that has got the securities license, lending license combo that I believe is needed to get out of a reorg. At the moment, that's what we've been putting together, and that's what FTX have also been putting together. And there may be traditional players that want to try and support that as well. Whichever one gives the best to creditors, hopefully, will be the one that gets to do that. Or there is a standalone reorg where Celsius figure out a structure and allow those creditors to vote upon that structure. And so I don't know which one in the public information is exactly going to happen, but there are different options available. Or the collateral behind it is actually reorged as well, where it's backed by some crypto and some equity, depending on if the bail-in model is adopted as well. So all of those are up for grabs. We in the non-public, in the public information, we don't know which one of those is going to prevail, as I think you know. So I can't really give you any additional things. But it's either going to go to a new home, which I'm confident would be a potential solution. That all depends upon transparency on collateral and what's behind those loans. Or there's going to be a reorg where that collateral gets reorged in some way, or the people that are receiving take a deeper haircut in order to release that collateral in full. Those are really the three options that I can think of.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a great capture of the situation, Simon. I appreciate the time, and I just want to stress that there are a lot of retail loan holders that also have large, massive positions in Earn, and so there's a lot of crossover between groups. And we all, exactly like you mentioned, with those potential three plans, we've talked. I've spoken about it before, for the necessity of capital infusion, for financial innovation, for solvent lending platforms to come in. In the best case scenario, no one receives a larger haircut at the expense of anyone else, that this can be a positive sum situation. And for those that want to go long crypto, long Celsius, if they would like to take a larger position in equity, for that to also be an option. I look forward to the 120-day exclusivity ending, so that the plans that you are talked about can be put forward in the bankruptcy court, and everyone can get the best plan, best end state going forward. Thanks again for the time, and I'll put myself down in the audience.
Okay, appreciate that. So there are very nervous people that have those loans. I can't give financial advice or legal advice, so I think people are very reluctant to repay those loans because they don't know whether what will happen to those funds. That's obviously a source of revenue for Celsius as it continues to reorg. And so I can only empathize with the conundrums that people are experiencing right now. And it must be putting a lot of people under a lot of financial anxiety. And, I completely understand that kind of feeling. But all we can do right now is organize ourselves together and work towards what the best results we can get for all creditors, for all lenders, and for those that have taken out their loans as well. Okay, Azad, is there any more requests? So I think we got Norman.
I think, Plan C wanted to say something.
Plan C, I've got to do a bit of a. Are you there? You can let Plan C up. A little bit of politics. I'm just going to publicly say Plan C. They wouldn't let me make use because some of the people that you may have blocked have been complaining to me, and I made a commitment that I wouldn't allow them to be blocked. But obviously, on your own spaces, you can do whatever. When you invite me, those are your own things. But I just want to publicly say that you're welcome to come up and say things. But on the co-host side, I just made that commitment because King stops people from listening or something like that. So, are you there, Plancy?
Yeah, I'm here, and I'm just here to listen, and 100% agree. I think that makes a lot of sense to do that. So yeah, that makes sense.
Awesome. So Plan C is, my an awesome member of the community that really brought people up to speed on the Celsius situation as a community member as well. Okay, so we've got is Norman, are you up?
Well, I am if you let me. Hi, Simon. Thanks for hosting this and online so often and responsive. I don't know if you saw the plan that I proposed. I think you said it was fair. I don't know if you looked at it in detail, but somebody asked me a question about the plan that I proposed, which basically gets everybody back their in-kind crypto to the amount of dollar value that it was when they filed bankruptcy. And somebody asked me, what about loans? And I thought about it, and I thought, well, I can add something. I wanted to run it by you. If a person has a loan, they should be given a choice to either pay off the loan by adding money, and I know you talked about that going into Celsius, but this would be part of a plan that they accept, so that it would be part of that they couldn't keep it for their money. They could either pay it off the loan with separately, or use their existing collateral to pay it off, or if the token went way down, they could just liquidate and keep whatever they got from it. And then if they did that, the crypto that they had for collateral would simply go back into the wallet, the earn wallet that they had when they started. And if they used their collateral to pay for it, any remaining collateral would go back into the earn wallet. And then my plan would continue with that same way. And of course, my plan doesn't include, the mining thing, so that your plan and Otis's plan could happen after that. But just trying to get everybody an instant payment back in their in kind, similar to the way they're talking about getting the custody money back, but
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's a good idea. What do you think?
Yeah, I think all ideas. So what I would say to that is there's kind of three outlets for your ideas. The firstly is just by saying them on these spaces, you can ensure that some of the right people will be listening to this. So someone with influence, Celsius, I'm sure we'll be listening to this, and we record them as well. So whatever you just said, I'm sure someone responsibly, someone within Celsius should really be listening to this if they're really trying to get community feedback. So that's the first part. The second part is the UCC. So we are currently, if you're a creditor, you are paying for the UCC in order to represent your interest. And so, therefore, you should contact the UCC with your ideas so that they can understand them. And the more clear you can be on your plans and more brief that they are in like a slide format, visuals, or a one-page format, they're getting spammed probably like crazy from very disgruntled people, and quite rightly. Those trying to get it in front of the UCC. So, one of the last community plan where they wanted to do like a mining IPO and a reorg of Celsius, they coordinated in trying to make sure that plan gets in front of the UCC. And so these Twitter spaces are really incredible because for the first time, rather than all these plans, ideas, and conversations happening behind closed doors, the community and the creditors, all 300,000 of us, get to bring these suggestions and try and get them in front of the UCC. The third route is actually, and you'd have to be a well-funded organization to take this route, is to try and get Celsius's investment bank to look at your plans. Unfortunately, due to the nature of investment banking, that can be an expensive process to be, and you've got to, kind of show that you can support them in executing the plan in order to try and get into that process. But as I said, the Celsius team are probably listening to these things. And then at some stage, we're going to find out whether Celsius can reorg themselves or whether a trustee is going to take over. I'm a bit skeptical about a trustee taking over because I think it will lead to the liquidation result, which is personally something I think is to be avoided. I don't think it will produce the best result for creditors. Or they'll be working with another partner, another platform, in order to implement some of those plans. And I think the answer to that is really the regulatory conversation, because the standalone reorg, I believe, is going to get regulatory challenge and regulatory motions filed. So those are the different options. I think your plan is as good in terms of how it works. It makes a lot of sense. And so there's going to be a certain stage in this process where all of these ideas are going to be refined, get to the right people. The UCC, the trustee, the community are all going to be engaging in order to try and get the best ideas to the front. So, we can look forward to that. It may feel painful right now because we're quite deep into the process and the cash burn is huge. But I think things are going to speed up in the coming weeks and months. Anyone else we pulled up would like to ask?
Yeah, we've got, we're just adding Misfit.
Hey, Misfit. You want to say something, Misfit?
Yeah, I was getting rugged. Sorry. So first of all, thank you for the space, for the information. As always, it's very educational. I was wondering if there was any information that you could potentially give us around what you guys are working on in El Salvador. Is that only for Bitcoin lending companies, or are you guys thinking more broadly within the crypto markets, and maybe how that can not only affect distressed Bitcoin lending companies, but also retail investors that have open positions within those distressed companies?
So it's no secret that we're applying at Bank to the Future for multiple license items, and one of those is work we've been doing in El Salvador as well. And I know it sounds like a strange jurisdiction, and it is a strange jurisdiction, but it's also the accumulation of my lifetime work. So for those of you that don't know, when we first launched Bank to the Future in 2010, we spent 3 years with UK regulators to open up securities laws so that the equivalent of non-accredited investors could invest in private equity. That work led to me having a meeting with the soon-to-be Prime Minister Boris Johnson to give the UK a Bitcoin strategy. We formed the UK Digital Currency Association, and we were working with tax authorities and various other authorities from a lot of the work that I'd done in banking reform before Bitcoin launched. And so that led to securities law reforms, but the Bitcoin strategy was dropped. And so I was very disappointed. So we then looked for another country. And I was invited in 2014 to a little island just off the bay called the Isle of Man. And in the Isle of Man, the government got behind the plan and they made the first steps to make Bitcoin the equivalent of legal tender, allowing people to pay their taxes in Bitcoin, creating an environment where Bitcoin companies could all come over. And they actually went out and became the first government to support Bitcoin. The downfall of that was as they got noisier and noisier, the Bank of England, from the work we tried to do in the UK, ended up shutting it down and saying to the regulators, if you support this, then we're going to remove clearing to your banking system. You rely upon, they have the Manx pound, which is almost like a stable coin on top of the British pound. So they peg their currency to it. They print the paper, but it works off the UK banking system. And so therefore the Bank of England becomes important. I tried to guide them on how to put together a stablecoin alternative, because this is around the time when Tether launched and they were trying to get traction in 2015, but the Bank of England won. And so the El Salvador side was in 2021, the president actually came out and said, we're making Bitcoin legal tender at Bitcoin Miami 2021. So this was awfully exciting for me. And so we started exploring what this means, how we can look at securities law reform, banking reform, pension reform, because we're making lots of Bitcoin securities. I forgot to mention, in 2014-15, we launched the first Bitcoin bond in Iceland. It was a company whereby it paid our investors on Bank to the Future a Bitcoin dividend every single day and paid out thousands of Bitcoin to our investors for a pretty small investment. It was a highly profitable investment. And it was backed by geothermal mining power in Iceland. And so when that was announced that the Bitcoin was legal tender, the Bitcoin bond project came around based upon some of the work that we'd done when Samson Mao went out there with Blockstream, who got into the mining business. And then suddenly we went there, and I recently went there again to try and support the government in various restructurings on the country level, and try and give them a third alternative to borrowing the money from China or borrowing the money from the IMF, which represents the dollar, and that there is a third alternative, a sovereign alternative, using the Bitcoin strategy. So that's what we were out there for. So while we're working on a reorg in the crypto lending space, we're also working at Bank to the Future on the sovereign side as well, what we can do there. And if securities law reform happens out there, there could be a very nice story where we could use a lot of these reforms, combine it with other jurisdictions. So obviously within our group, we've got SEC regulated broker dealers and various other things. But we could put together a very nice thing, and the rest is unfortunately non-public information that I can't. All I can say is we're working hard. We think that this is a moment in financial history, and out of disasters, as we have done back in 2016 and other times, we used financial innovation to turn a disaster into what actually turned into a very profitable investment. But obviously, I can't guarantee you that. Anyone that does try and guarantee you that is over promising. And you gotta understand that the only way to fill a $3 billion hole is to take risks, unfortunately. And so that's the Chapter 11 process, and the rest is non-public information, unfortunately.
I think Misfit, did you have a question, or should we move on to the next speaker?
I just wanted to add, funny enough, today marks 1 year since El Salvador made Bitcoin legal tender.
Wow.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. It's interesting that you guys are looking at that jurisdiction. I don't think that would affect the ability of retail investors if for some reason the SEC does not
No, we
it,
wouldn't.
correct?
US is, when we interact with US investors, that's done via our broker dealer in US. So, what we've built at Bank to the Future is we've taken lots of different global securities laws and built technology to compliantly onboard based upon the jurisdiction of the investor. So if you're from the US, then we are very confident with Chapter 11, a broker dealer, and many of our partners that we've been funding over the years. We can put together a solution for US that meets the regulatory obligations to get a reorg out of the current situation.
Awesome, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Misfits. I think the next speaker is Phil. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear. Thank you.
Thanks, Azad, for the organising, and as always, thanks, Simon, for all you're doing for the community. You people really are grateful for that.
Appreciate it. Where's the accent? I recognise that. Where are you from?
Cardiff.
Cardiff, yeah.
Yeah.
I spent most of my I spent 10 years of my life in Bristol, so not too far from Cardiff.
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, that's another accent again. That is, but
I didn't pick up the accent, unfortunately, because my father, he sadly passed, but he had a bit of a Cockney accent because after the war he moved over to London. So
yeah, I do love the West Country accent as well, I got to admit. What I was going to say was, you said earlier, and I've only been in the conversation about 50 minutes, so I hope I'm not asking a question that somebody's already asked. I really do. But you said earlier you're hopeful that in the next few weeks and months things will start moving faster. And yet I can remember reading one of Diller's tweets after the last court hearing, where he said that the judge is leaning towards an examiner, he thinks, and if an examiner comes in, then the process will slow and freeze. So I just wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah, so the interesting side with this whole examiner versus trustee. So to those of you that are less involved in the process and not Chapter 11, I'm not a Chapter 11 expert, but I've got a great legal team that advises me on all this stuff. And the community has, and Thomas has been given some great content to the community on bankruptcy proceedings. But when there is an argument that the existing board may have done wrongdoing, and I think I've made it very public, my opinion on that. We don't need to go down there again, but I've got lots of videos where I've outlined what I think's happened in the past. Then the choices are that you can have an examiner, and an examiner does a full-blown investigation that, or you can have a trustee over where the trustee decision maker instead. My fear of the trustee taking over is that they'll just go for the easy option, which is Chapter 7 and liquidation of assets. And I don't think that will support the industry or support creditors, in my opinion. So I think an examiner is right because these things do need to be investigated and the community deserves the truth. If there is a reorg, the examiner is able to produce the type of information that people could rely upon when deciding how to focus on that. I do agree with David Adler that it will slow down the process. But I'm not sure what choice we have in that matter, because investigations like this take time. And really what it does is it means that Celsius will be more focused on what they need to do with the examiner. And then I believe that we need to rely more on the UCC working on the best reorgs, as well as Celsius's investment bank as well. So if we could have kind of a division of labor that comes from that, then we might be able to get a good result. My fear is that you've got to understand that Kirkland, that Celsius is engaged in order to represent them, are under instruction of the board. So, if you as a company hire a counsel to represent you, essentially Alex has hired the best counsel out there, and creditors' money is being used to pay for that best counsel. And their job is to get the best result for the company. The UCC, the Unsecured Creditors Committee, is their job, and we're paying for lawyers with the UCC, is to get the best result for us. The trustee is to interject when they think things may have had some kind of criminal or this isn't moving. For example, they could sell, for example, GK8, which is their custody asset. If they sell that, they could then just burn through the money from that in order to reinvest it into mining, and they could find another 70 million like they just did, and then they could just keep burning through creditors and drag this out to the point where creditors are so desperate they're willing to accept anything that comes through. And remember, when you accept an offer from Celsius, you'll be given a release from legal proceedings against the company and against the directors. It can't be released from criminal proceedings. And so therefore, Kirkland's job is not to represent us. That's the UCC's job. Kirkland's job is to get as many legal claims against the board and the company disappear. And that's their job. One of the easy strategies for that is to do something like make all the different groups like loan, earn, and custody, split them all up, give some easy wins to companies like custody so it looks like you're representing the best interest. And then you demonstrate that, earn money is owned by us, and therefore if we give you some back, you're lucky. In order to do that, you're going to have to sign this release, a bit like what we had to do in the Bitfinex situation. When you accepted the equity, you released Bitfinex from any claim. So all I'm trying to say is that the Kirkland strategy, I believe, is divide and conquer and represent their client and get the best result for their client, which is many releases. And the examiner is going to be doing the investigations. And then you've got the UCC that should be working on a timely reorganization process and representing our interests, as well as a bank who's incentivized to get a transaction done. So I'm sorry if that's a lot of goop, but it's important for everyone to understand who's representing who so they don't get confused when all of these different things happen.
No, it's great when you lay it out like that so everyone can understand clearly. And what concerns me about all this is I hear what you say about the examiner, and it should be a good thing. Is just the time it's taking, the burn that Celsius are using, paying Kirkland, the UCC paying White and Chase. I'm concerned about that.
Yes, so I think my answer to that is I could be wrong here, but that based upon the public information, Celsius's strategy is carry that on for as long as possible. Sell off more assets so they can carry it on for as long as possible, and then eventually try and recover with a mining company. Because I don't, if they try to recover with the loan company, they'd have to have a reorg that complies with securities laws from my.
Yeah. Well, I don't think anyone's got any faith really in what Celsius want to do at the moment. I certainly don't. The other side to it for me, just last question, thank you, is White and Chase. Are they, the reports I'm reading from the courtrooms are that White and Chase don't seem to be as effective for the creditors, so the UCC, as Kirkland do for Celsius. Is that a fair assessment?
Based upon the public information and what I've seen so far, you could certainly say that Kirkland are doing a brilliant job with Celsius, and we haven't seen much yet from the UCC. And so the examiner has stepped in, which UCC would interpret as stop getting on our turf. We can do that. So, I think it's too soon to judge. But I don't think we've seen everything that the UCC have been planning yet. So it's hard to judge that, but I can understand why people are antsy. And remember, the UCC are being played. It does reduce the amount that we can claim from Celsius. So they do work for you. So try and make sure that you're getting your thoughts over to the UCC, and that those law firms are representing the best interest of creditors. One of the things they would examine as well is conflicts of interest between, and I don't want to create a conspiracy theory here, but just putting it out there. The board members, one of the board members that we used to work with at Celsius, used to work for the law firm that the UCC, White and Case. So maybe there's certain conflicts that the examiner will look at as well. I don't want to, most law firms have worked with lots of different institutions. The law firm that we are using for our recovery plans, they've worked on Lehman Brothers, they've worked on Mt. Gox, and various other things as well. So there's lots of politics, and that's why I think it's the importance of these spaces as well. But so far, I haven't seen anything that makes me think that White and Case are doing a better outwitting Kirkland yet. But I reserve judgment for now.
Thank you very much, Simon. Thanks.
I think we've got Thomas Gardner.
Hey, Thomas.
Hey, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
I can hear you well.
Awesome. Well, first off, thank you so much, Simon, for everything that you've done. You've given us your entire life here for these last few months, and at such a difficult time. I lost my dad about 20 years ago, and I know it's very difficult. So prayers to you and your family and everyone for that, and just a huge thank you across the board.
Yeah, if I'm honest, it's quite a good distraction for me. But yeah, the timing was just crazy, and I really appreciate your prayers, your comments, and the amazing support the community has given me in this moment. But yeah, the distraction has been helpful, but I do have my moments where I feel like I need to give my father the time and honoring that he deserves.
Well, we're all lifting you up, and obviously keeping in mind your non-disclosures, everything you can and can't say. I'm going to ask stuff, and just respond to it as you can and as you see fit. Obviously, I am, although on a much smaller scale, in a similar position to yourself in that I have what I consider to be a material money on the platform, but a total loss of it is not going to materially affect my life. I was smart enough to only have a small amount of money relative to my entire holdings. in the loan platform on Celsius. So my question, kind of keeping in mind everything that's going on, I'm very excited to hear when we can what comes of the Salt acquisition and that for the lending side of it, but just wondering how I can best position myself, realizing you're not be able to give me financial advice or anything, but how I can best, or I or someone like me can position themselves the best to be able to capitalize on the other side of this when everything shakes out, to be in the best position to be able to get as whole as possible. The other day, for instance, I began the process of registering with Bank to the Future. So perhaps that's the single best thing I could do from that standpoint. But anything you can speak to that would be of benefit to someone like myself on the loan side of the platform with small amount of money in the earn account as well, but to be able to best position myself moving forward as everything settles down and gets shaken out.
Sure. What a great question. Firstly, I want to say, I think the idea that Eric Voorhees and Sean Owen came up with when Eric invested. So just to give the background, I'm a shareholder in Shapeshift, and Shapeshift was created by Eric Voorhees. Eric Voorhees was one of the first Bitcoiners at the first Bitcoin conference, and he created Satoshi Dice, which was the first Bitcoin-based IPO, as you could call it, that got regulatory enforcement action, and he had to refund all of the investors, even though they made money from it. So it's an interesting thing because he didn't register it with the SEC. And he invested in Salt lending. I was a shareholder in Shapeshift. Shapeshift recently turned their company into a DAO, which is another very interesting project that, if we were a little bit further ahead in time, might become a process that could be part of the future Chapter 11 bankruptcy proceedings in the future. But I think it's a bit too innovative at this stage to get the sign off it would need. But anyway, when they came up with that idea of creating a home for people that didn't want to sell their Bitcoin and could get some dollars out, not creating the tax liability, and also being able to earn some yield to pay the interest on that and manage risks. Fortunately, you manage your risks, and you saw that putting money to receive earn is actually not savings as it was portrayed, but it's actually investment, and investments mean you can end up losing your money, and therefore you should invest a proportionate amount relative to your savings and spending money so that it doesn't affect your spending or savings. So well done for that. Very, very sorry for anybody that didn't have that lesson prior to this. And I hope you watched the video that I created yesterday in order to how I went from deep in debt and became that in financial disaster. I hope it helps you. So I think the idea of borrowing against your Bitcoin is a great idea. And I think Celsius, Voyager, and BlockFi did an amazing job of making that mainstream within the Bitcoin and crypto space. And then the regulatory side just wasn't really taken care of. So I think when we can now, understand the lessons that I tried to cover when covering it to the last one, sort of effective leadership, new companies that have the regulatory side covered and new risk models, means that the original idea is still a good idea. And so what I'm really excited about is to once people recover, and I know some people literally had all their money locked up, and so they can't even cover their spending right now, which is disastrous for some. But if they can overcome that and move from spending to saving to investing to contributing through that cycle I covered yesterday, and really giving everyone an opportunity to take this disaster and turn it into one of the best financial decisions that they ever did. That's what I'm excited about. And that's what I think we could build together as a community from here. And so what can people do? Well, firstly, watch that video. Put together a plan of how to move from spending to saving to investing to contributing. Next year, once the DAS settles, we'll relaunch our retirement plan B, which is the the original thing that we were trying to build with Celsius in partnership, but now we've got Salt. So we will be building solutions, and hopefully Celsius has a successful reorg, or and some of the others, if you're in Voyager, has a successful reorg. And there's effective competition across the industry to drive the innovation, and everybody's just learned a lot more. So I would say that my job as a shareholder in Bank to the Future would be to say, we've got lots of exciting things coming up. So create your account on banktothefuture.com if you don't have one already. Unfortunately, the downside of regulatory compliance, the upside is you get those investor protections, transparency, disclosures. The downside is they make you give a lot of data and documents, and we have to comply with that. So the onboarding, unfortunately, is not as easy as what you might be used to. But we're working on those applications to be able to support not just high net worth investors, but non-high net worth investors as well, so that they have equal opportunity to rebuild and recover from financial disaster and really work through a long-term plan now that we have this amazing time in financial history. So I want to leave people with that excitement. This is an incredibly painful time for suffering the cost of living crisis in the traditional markets, and maybe they lost all their savings in the crypto lending crisis. But I think there's a plan for everybody if they can just muster up the motivation, relearn, and put together a long plan. And then they'll be in a position like you, where if they do invest in something that blows up, it's a hit, just like it was for me. It violated my rule, because my rule is that I want to have more Bitcoin every month than I had the previous month. And this broke my rule, which I don't like, which enraged me a lot and inspired me a lot to try and put together a reorg and come up with solutions. But we're there. We'll do this. And I one thing that's really good about this, the community's been educated on equity. At Bank to the Future, we found it really hard to educate people on the value of equity, the legal rights that come with it. But now all people that would only invest in tokens before are suddenly all pitching the value of equity and the returns that can be made, because most of my returns, they came from Bitcoin and they came from equity, and they came some of it from taking risk with my Bitcoin and putting it in things like the Ethereum and various other things. But if we get sound money management, sound risk allocation, then everyone, please do check out the free video series I created on retirementplanb.com in 2020. It's still there, and learn the lessons. And next year, I think we can put together a real robust infrastructure and rebuild as an industry with all the lessons, and hopefully build it based upon sound money, rather than rebuilding a fiat-based Ponzi scheme and credit money. And let's build hard money. Sorry, long answer, but it triggered me off. Thank you.
Okay, we have one request from Ari.
Hey Ari, how you doing? Are you there, Ari?
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Hi, Simon. Thank you for your time. Thank you for all that you've done for the community. And I'm so sorry for your loss, for the loss of your father. My condolences. I've been following you on YouTube for a few years, and on all the different channels and everything. And you seem like a genuinely nice guy who cares about people and cares about the community. And I just wanted to say that, and my heart really goes out to you in this tough time that you're dealing with. And my question is, I've really been struggling with my mental health, going through this crisis. I have a large loan out on Celsius, and I'm in the loan group. I'm helping. I was one of the organizers in the beginning, trying to encourage people to write letters into the judge to express what they would like to see happen with their loans, and what they would like, some solutions to the problem. Don't just write the judge sob stories, but write, and propose solutions to the problem. Solutions that we could go over, to benefit the community. And I was just wondering, with my, is there? I know you're under NDA, so you can't really say much. But is there anything at all that, any, likelihood? What do you think of the likelihood is of is of the loan book eventually getting bought out by somebody, some entity that wants the business? And just maybe you could speak about that. What do you think about the likelihood is of that? And um, I can't really speak for anyone else, but I know personally I would be willing to agree to, better terms for whoever buys the loan book. Like, I'd be willing to agree to a higher interest rate. I'd be willing to pay the money, like a new origination fee. I'd be willing to do whatever it takes, for the new company who does want to buy the loan book and buy us out, um, to to make sure they make money, and to
Yeah.
so maybe you could speak about that. What do you think about the likelihood is of us getting bought out, and
Yeah. Okay.
and our
So
loans being transferred over to a solvent entity, such as maybe yourself or someone else?
yeah, there's only three outcomes that come from this. Either the whole thing gets liquidated, which is moving to either a Chapter 11 liquidation or Chapter 7, which I think is the worst outcome. I know some people are pushing for that because they'd like to buy back their crypto lower, and they think they might use that. So that may be your strategy. If this whole thing moves into liquidation, then have a deal with your mental health. A strategy, whatever happens. When I released the 2020 video series on retirementplanb.com, I wanted everyone to have a strategy of what if we continue to grow through central bank digital currencies? What if we go into economic decline because we shift into an unwinding of debt and hard money? What if we go into inflation? What if we go into deflation? What if the banks fail? What if Bitcoin fails? What if there's a war? What if there's a pandemic? And I tried to create everyone an investment strategy, which I spent 20 years on, so that whatever happens, you're okay. And you sit aside as a spectator because you've got an approach for all of those eventualities. And so let's apply that to the Celsius situation. The way you deal with mental health is, firstly, I'm not a psychologist, but I'm addicted to self-development, and I have my mentors. And anytime I'm feeling down, I go to one of my read a book, whether it's an audio book, I jump on the treadmill, and I remind myself of what's important in life. And tying that into your kind comments with regards to my father, I remember that our whole life, I got into the money game because my father lost all his money in the stock market and asked me where that money went. And that drove me to all of the decisions that I made that ended up me going to Bitcoin conferences with my wife, founding a business. And all of that financial disaster for my father led to everything that made me get to where I am, where I don't have to worry about these things and money's not an issue. And so it's just getting yourself in, maybe this is meant to happen. Maybe this was all meant to be. And maybe this was all part of the plan. Because in disaster, great things come. And if you can get yourself in that space, however you need to get there, whether it's meditation, whether it's religion, whether it's focusing on your health and listening to people that can you in the spiritual level or psychological level, I really encourage people to do that. But this only goes, have a strategy for every outcome. So, okay, if this moves into Chapter 7 liquidation, I'd be really upset. But do you know what? I'll take my dollars and I'll buy back my Bitcoin, and maybe it crashes the market further, and I've got a long-term strategy. And maybe I end up with, creating lots of private equity opportunities that I can share with our community of investors that can buy distressed assets in a really bad market. I don't want that, but we could, at Bank to the Future, we can share that with our community. That's how everyone got wealthy, because we distributed those opportunities across the community. So you might end up, well, what's the other strategy? Well, the other strategy, maybe Celsius or Voyager or any of them can figure out a great auction strategy, sell off some assets, create some kind of mining IPO, and they figure out the regulatory side. I really don't know how it happens, but maybe they've got a way. And therefore, we end up with whatever the outcome of that is. So they have to find a home if they are to avoid Chapter 7, and it has to be better than liquidation. The third outcome is that it reorgs through another organization, whether it's FTX, whether it's us, whether it's someone else, and therefore there is a new home. The bit that's causing you the mental challenge is the division within the community. I find that mentally challenging. I've never had so much criticism and attacks in my life than when I tried to do this, but it comes with whenever you suggest a plan, there's different vested interests, and those vested interests want to attack you because you may not be meeting that particular niche vested interest. That's been getting me down a little bit because I've never experienced that before. I've always been, in a supportive community where we're working on building people's financial futures, and touch wood, a lot of our opportunities have worked well. We've been deeper diversification. None of our investors were fully exposed to Celsius because they learned the lessons of diversification investing versus savings and various other things. So one of those three outcomes is going to happen. Have a strategy for all of them. If Celsius can pull out a magic bag, then you may have equity, you may have exposure to that, but they've got to prove to regulators and all those things. And if they do that successfully, okay, there'll be a real plan that's better than liquidation. And if it goes to someone else, then we for certainly are sat here. If Celsius can't get out of that situation, then we've got a solution, and we'll fight for that till the end because we think we can do better than liquidation. But worst case scenario, it moves to liquidation, you get payment in kind, you get, let's say, 50% of your assets back, and the market crashes and you get to rebuild and buy back at a cheaper rate. That's the only thing that I can or can do, because the uncertainty, the bit that's gonna drive us insane. And get ready for this taking a long time. I originally forecasted the best case scenario is that something happens next year. So if you're constantly holding on to there's money right around the corner and you rely upon that, please right now put together another plan, because it's not right around the corner. It will come. There's a lot of people in this community working tirelessly day and night to try and get a best outcome. And the community can only divide together, support each other, and we're all in this together. Because I tell you one thing, I respect Bitcoin more than I respect, most things in the world, with the of maybe my wife and my father and other things that are more important than money. And so I will fight till the end to try and get that Bitcoin back through whatever strategy. And if I get that Bitcoin back through my strategy, then it will work for every other creditor as well, because we're all in this together. And hopefully we're not going to fall for Kirkland's divide and conquer strategy. Unfortunately, prisoner's dilemma will mean that everyone will go for their own interests, and that's somewhat inevitable. However, if we hate each other, Chapter 7 is the worst outcome, which I still believe results in a crash in the market, dollars back, so that you can buy into that crash if you still believe in the market. Hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you.
I think that's it. There's no more, unless anyone else wants to ask a question.
Okay, request now or forever hold your peace. If we don't get any requests in the next couple of minutes, then we're going to end it here. Okay,
we've got one, Michael. Let's see.
Hey, Michael. I'll let him in. Oh. Hey, Michael, how you doing? Can't hear you yet, Michael. Maybe there's a lag.
Hey, Simon, how are you? I'm doing well.
Awesome.
Hey, can you talk a little bit more about the clawback issue with Celsius that you talk about from time to time?
Yeah, clawback, I believe, it was something I didn't know too much about before this process. But clawback is the process of defending creditors, i.e. everyone that we owe money to, that they owe money to, by bringing in back as much money that was that may be argued to be illegitimately spent. So anything that went to an insider, for example, I think approximately, don't quote me if I'm wrong, not legal advice, 180 days prior to the filing, by an insider could be clawed back. So, if the board, for example, were pulling out their money and moving it over to custody, and that led to favorable conditions, or maybe they dumped some tokens on the community, or whatever it may be, there may be ways of clawing that back. It also has another effect. There were some pretty major loans. Full disclosure, I'm a shareholder in Bitfinex, and Bitfinex is the same management team behind Tether. Tether, publicly available information, lent Celsius $1 billion, and they liquidated that loan, which liquidated a bunch of Bitcoin that they had on collateral. And that could be clawed back, which would be additional funds to be shared amongst creditors to fill more of that hole. But also the bit that's very unpopular is those that withdrew within the last 90 days could be asked to return those funds. Now, it wouldn't affect anyone that withdrew less than 7,500 at the time of the bankruptcy. But Celsius and Kirkland have already indicated that they're reserving funds from paying out to custody people for those clawbacks. And so they've already revealed that that's something that they may want to do and may need to do. And so various different interest groups have been putting together defenses around how you defend against that. But really, the idea behind the clawback is to pull back as much money in so that it can pay out more to creditors. But that would make, essentially Celsius the villains, as it were. And they've already indicated that that's the strategy they may follow. I think it's somewhat if it moves to Chapter 7 liquidation, because at that stage, or if the trustee takes it, then their job is to get as much money in liquidation, and clawbacks are somewhat inevitable if it moves to Chapter 7 liquidation. This is disaster for some people because they may have paid tax on certain interests that could be clawed back. They may have moved funds around. It could cause distrust in the industry if a company ever goes. And so, in the past, safe harbor laws have been discussed on different recordings and different spaces, which was really around preventing in financial services where companies are dependent upon each other, the domino effect, and they may apply here. And so there's going to be lots of precedent case, and it's worth exploring if it comes to that. Some of the spaces, I know Plan C has done spaces just dedicated to this topic. So for those that think they're in that situation, check out some of Plan C's spaces as well with various experts that can talk to it.
So it sounds like that's mainly focused on insiders with large amounts of stake and millions and billions of dollars.
It could be anyone. My guess is that it could be them, but it still could be everyone that withdrew. And the people have got to look at the defenses here. But Celsius and Kirkland are motivated to do that, especially if it goes into liquidation and they may not have a relationship with their customers moving forward.
Interesting. Thank you, Simon.
I've let a bunch of people in, so some of you, it's a bit of a free-for-all. Azad, who should we call?
Let's go with Joe.
Hey, Joe, you there?
Hey, Simon. Thank you for holding these spaces, and I totally agree. It's great that everything is being done in an open forum. You could have easily not taken the abuse that you've gotten along the way and just kind of submitted your plans.
Yeah, on that, if I was a sensible business person, I would have just done what FTX did, and I would have started negotiating behind the scenes and sweep in and try and pick up some discounted assets for Bank to the Future, and not offer equity to anyone, and do the JP Morgan strategy. But because I decided to speak openly about it and educate people on it, and get other bidders in as well that could maybe do better offers, I got to be the most stupid and dumbest business person in history. However, I believe in karma, so I believe that it leads to a better result overall. And I think doing it open allows people to attack me. It allows people to get those objections out there, and unfortunately that comes with the territory. But I just feel this is the new way of doing business, and it felt like the right way of doing things. So sorry, so over to your question.
Yeah, totally agree with that. And it also gives everybody an education and a chance, with 300,000 people that are affected by this. So, we're getting an education that we didn't want or expect to get in terms of bankruptcy and equity and all these other things. And it allows people to hopefully respectfully discuss ideas and come up with different ideas and bounce them off each other. And I think the goal is, that the UCC and Celsius hopefully works well with the UCC and the courts and gets us the best outcome possible.
Yeah, I would say on that comment, like after the Bitfinex shareholders were like the most educated, and those that went through Mt. Gox as well, they were like the most educated in the industry. They fully understood the difference between debt, equity, tokens, and they got the inside scoop working with a business and being on the inside of that business. We had amazing shareholder meetings every year where you got to learn several things. So I do believe that the ones that have been through this, moving into the next bull market, you guys have been, you guys and ladies and everyone has been educated on the next level scale compared to Mt. Gox and the Bitfinex situation. And I think we're literally within this room, we're going to have some of the most wise and savvy people to Bitcoin and crypto based investment banking restructuring. Moving into the next bull market, you guys and girls are going to be amazing, amazingly educated in terms of how to invest, diversify, and not let this shit happen to you ever again. With you again.
Yeah, so, a lot of the ideas that are being put out there, there's a question of like feasibility. There are a lot of great ideas, but sometimes, great ideas are just not feasible in the real world, especially in courts. A lot of people think that Chapter 7 is the way to go, but they probably just don't realize that Chapter 7 would probably lead to a much longer, drawn out, vying for position in terms of, who should be first. Is it earn custody, loans, and there's so many complexities to this. So if it just goes into liquidation, everybody's only option is to just fight as hard as possible for the most in terms of, the recoveries, which would take a lot longer than a good reorganization plan. So in feasibility, I'm wondering, if there's in the beginning, we had a lot of great lawyers. Thomas was amazing at putting together spaces. Clancy put together a bunch of spaces with lawyers to educate us in terms of, how the process works. I'm wondering now that there's a lot of different ideas. There was the IPO idea. There's your ideas. They're all great and synergistic. Hopefully, I put together a bunch of ideas that people on Spaces had, and keep revising it based on feedback.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering if we can somehow. I know he's taken a little bit of a beating as well, but Thomas was just amazing for the community. I'm wondering if we can get him to put together a Spaces and just kind of discuss what the courts and the UCC and trustee look for in terms of feasibility of plans.
Yeah, I think we are going to move to a more modularized community. So, for example, if you look at the progress we made, it's easy to focus on the shit because it's been a really tough time for so many, and the emotions are really high. But as a community, I do believe that we've progressed pretty significantly already. So in the beginning, when I suggested equity, everyone was like, "No way, we want the cell token," and none of these things matters. The regulations don't matter, and various other things. We just want to reopen, and but now everyone's pushing for equity because the idea of a Bitcoin mining IPO was put out there, which I think is a great idea. And that was the original Celsius plan. Essentially, they were going to go public with a mining company. Requires a lot more feasibility and new management from my perspective. But I've been involved in mining since 2014, and the contacts that we built the Bitcoin Iceland, the Bitcoin bond with, they now mine approximately 20% of the hash rate in Bitcoin. and they've been involved in 2 IPOs. So, we have the desire and the will to support in the best way possible. The only reason this would go into Chapter 7 is if Celsius let it go into Chapter 7 by having an alternative agenda. So that's what needs to be, fought against. And the way that happens is by divide and conquer, which is the Chapter 7 strategy. And I think it leads to the worst outcome personally. I can understand people just wanting their money back and buying some cheap crypto. But hey, if we go there, then we'll deal with it. But the feasibility of a reorg, as I said, there's 3 decision makers. There is Celsius, which is the key decision maker, which have an investment bank, and the UCC will be pushing them to push that process to get forward. The UCC and the trustees. So the feasibility of a reorg is we just got to deal with all the objections, and this is what I try to do. So the community now have decided, okay, equity is a good solution. Most people agree with that. That's a massive step forward. It took me ages to get people to understand that this hole was big. It is going into bankruptcy. The management needs to change because of the regulatory issues, but now most people agree that equity is the solution. So how do you fill a $3 billion hole, or almost $3 billion hole? Well, equity is the way to do it. That's great that we've made that progress. Now we can go around what equity. Well, some people will say a Bitcoin mining IPO and just let the company reopen. Some people were suggesting that Celsius should have 49% of that equity. And then, that got out there and that got attacked violently by the community because they realized, well, I've worked in investment banking and normally you don't give that amount. They shouldn't profit from that and all that various stuff. And so then it gets refined and everyone gets down to, all right, well, maybe it should be 10% management share options. Okay. So then who's the management? And then we need to decide things like, if we can modularize it and get more coordinated, things like, well, let's take the emotions out of this, because originally I was trying to say all the reasons that I'm a bit pissed off with the management. But let's take that emotion out. Some people love the management. Most people hate the management from my experience. So what needs to happen? Well, you need to be, in order to do an IPO, you need to not be a bad actor. So let's say, are the existing team bad actors? And bad actors is a legal definition. We don't need to argue about whether it exists or not. It does exist. And so therefore, let's just look up whether they are or not. And if a company's gone into bankruptcy, they're often considered a bad actor. Does that mean that they can do a mining IPO? Well, we can stop arguing about that. So then who is the best management to do that? And then you look at the lending business. Well, that requires, if we agree that it does require security law compliance, the reason I know that is because BlockFi, when they negotiated with the SEC said, we'll allow you to reopen, but you've got to apply and make a security. And so they're applying. So we know that once the community realizes that, they'll be like, all right, well, how do you get the licenses? And so all we got to do is just modularize it down and recognize that we're all on the same team. And then you just say, well, does the Celsius brand have a future? I would argue it doesn't. I would say it's a tarnished brand, and therefore no one would trust that. And trust is the biggest commodity here. And so we look at, well, what is trust? And you can speak to, so Plan C has scheduled in, we've committed, I've committed, Thomas has committed, David Adler has also committed to doing regular weekly spaces. I think if we can just get the strategy moving forward, I'm pretty sure the UCC is listening to this. I'm pretty sure Celsius is listening. I'm pretty sure the investment banks listen to this. I'm pretty sure the trustee will be listening to this. And if they're not, let's make them. So feasibility, it's either Chapter 7 or it's a reorg. I personally will fight till the bitter end for the reorg, and all we got to do is show them how we deal with all the objections, how it gives them a better result. And so we've got investment bankers that can do that job. They can do the financial modeling, and they've got investment bankers, and so has the UCC. So let's let them do all their thing and show that we can produce a better result than liquidation. That's all we've got to do. And if we can't, then it goes into liquidation, and we've got a plan anyway. So, okay, next.
Okay, let's go with Crypto Girl.
Yes, hello. This is the time I've done this. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Okay, firstly, thank you, Simon, for being a voice of reason and so honourable in this space. You know, as a fellow Brit, you've been very reassuring to me since June the 12th, basically. I would like to revisit this whole issue of the withhold and custody people versus the earn people, because I think that if there's going to be a future to crypto lending, this issue of whether you hold the property that you've invested on the platform, if you hold the title to it or not, is key. Because why on earth would anybody hand over their life savings and give up the title to it? So it's very concerning to me listening to how Kirkland are dividing us and separating off those of us that are in earn from those who are in custody. And like you say, if this low-lying fruit is paid out and those custody people accept it, they now have a precedent to turn around and tell the rest of us that we didn't own our assets and we've just lost title to them completely. And so it was concerning that nobody stood up and countered that White and Case didn't immediately say, well, hang on, all the things that the lady who posted her docket yesterday stated, that custody has only been in existence for 89 days before the bankruptcy, that custody is a pass-through place to be, that you have to go into it and out of it, whether you're transferring, paying a loan, or entering the platform. So that snapshot on that day is not representative of what custody truly is.
Yeah.
And so if those people paid out, the ball is then in their court and they can run with this and we'll all be big losers. So the first question is, how do you think we can counter this? And then the second question is, when you start your platform,
Can I do one at a time, and then I'll let you take the second one, because I forget the
Okay.
first question when you do the second one. So let me help everyone understand the issue. So when you deposit your money at a bank, this was the very first presentation I gave at the first Bitcoin conference in the world. When I presented, I said to people, when you deposit your money at a bank, the bank becomes the legal owner of your money. They can also spend it as they choose, it's essentially their property. And they can allocate it to the real estate markets and benefit from all of that. And it can be inflated away against your pension and against your savings. That was my first ever thing that I tried to share with the Bitcoin community. And so if, not legal advice, but if Celsius is claiming that the money that you did, so when I originally spoke to Alex Mashinsky, this is also public information, he told me that the regulatory model depended upon a peer-to-peer lending model. And so he told me that it was peer-to-peer, and it was people that had some Bitcoin being matched up with, that wanted some yield, being matched up with people that wanted to borrow, and that was all matched up in a peer-to-peer fashion. And therefore, it was exempt from certain regulations because they're just a technology that does peer-to-peer. Essentially, the argument that DeFi uses. At some stage, the compliance team took over and recognized that actually it's not peer-to-peer, the way it's being operated. And then they started investing in Bitcoin mining, and then they started doing DeFi contracts, and then they started doing trading, and now it became a hedge fund, essentially. But then when money was missing, at some stage that happened, if they changed the terms and conditions whereby they're saying all the money that you put in is ours, which means that they need a banking license in order to. So when I used to read like banking legislations, when I wrote the book Bank to the Future, and when I was doing monetary reform before Bitcoin, I actually am geeky enough to have read like the Bank Charter Act of 1844 and all the different banking reforms just based around these issues in traditional markets, as banks gradually started to own the money more from a gold safety deposit box. And so if it is true that they own the money, then they're an unlicensed bank. And so that is an issue. And so the separation, the whole custody thing is, for example, when when we did the security law compliant version, what we did is we essentially opened a company for everyone in Cayman Islands, and then allowed them to have segregation and custody of those funds, so that if Banks of the Future ever went bankrupt, they would be segregated in custody and don't exist on our balance sheet, and we don't own that money. That was the first iteration of a bank that we tried to create, where you could own your own money and they're segregated in trust. And therefore, you decide with your money when you want to take risk with it, and it moves from an investment account to a deposit account, and vice versa. Essentially, Celsius changed it where the regulators started to crack down, and they said, okay, we'll create a custody service because, and were they authorized to create that custody service? Because that is a regulated activity. And so they said, okay, the SEC saying this is a security, let's put a bunch of money from Earn into custody. But the money, I believe, was just all together and wasn't commingled and separate. But by terms, it said custody's money is theirs. And then Kirkland had done the maths and said only 4% in custody, so let's give them that win. They all get their money back, and then everyone else, we get the argument that we own the money. And the defense against that is, well, that would be illegal banking. Because that would be, there is no license there that you've achieved that allow you to own people's money and rehypothecate it and do the fractional reserve banking model at its extreme. So these issues are going to have to be, and they will lead to as different results come out. The unfortunate bit is the prisoner's dilemma, which is that everyone will go towards the community that gets them the highest level of return. And therefore, it's inevitable that we'll all start working against each other, which really happened as we started proposing solutions when, for example, those that own cell tokens started putting together a different plan for those that don't own cell tokens. And unfortunately, just all these different interests are aligned there. But I think everyone knows the difference between custody and custody now. And the way to combat that in the future is by doing it with security. So when you invest your money, you know your funds are at risk, and there's a disclosure around how it's invested. So we can't just fire up a security and then invest in a different way to what you originally thought. That would be securities fraud. So you know, that's how you protect against that, by getting the lending side, where, for example, have very low risk yield, or you could have more exotic, higher risk yield, as they do with other models as well, like Unchained Capital and stuff that do different things. And there's also coming in Bitcoin as well. So, you know, there's ways of tackling these things when people understand, and it's all about disclosures. The issue with Celsius is no one understood what was happening, and it changed halfway through. And then the CEO never changed the narrative because he got lots of people to deposit based upon the belief that it was the original model. And then when it changed, it wasn't disclosed. And then no one knew the risks they were taking, and no one knew what they were signing up for.
Okay, so I'm very encouraged that there is a legal argument to combat the fact that we all clicked on those terms and conditions, that it would be an illegal bank. So that does give me encouragement. But my other question was going to be, when you get your thing up and running, is it going to be only for accredited investors, or would people like me be able to transfer over? I know you'd said earlier in some other spaces that you've been in that you're mainly invested in Bitcoin and stable coins.
As collateral, yeah. But in terms of investing in staking and securities, that can all be done through securities. So please don't interpret me saying that the lending model should have good collateral as you can't receive returns through proof of stake, through Ethereum, for example. That can all be done. It's just the collateral of the lending model should be pristine so you can manage the risks. And the fewer the risks that you're managing through hedging strategies and various other things, the more responsible you can deal with disasters when they happen. And that's really the challenge of the model moving forward.
Right.
And so, sorry, what was the question?
whether you would have to be accredited to
accredited.
be part of it.
Okay. I've spent 12 years trying to make it possible for to be able to make this possible. We succeeded in the UK, and then they said it's only available for the UK. Then President Obama created the Jobs Act, and America said it's only okay in the US when people do a smaller version of an IPO. And then we've now been working on securities law reform with 3 different jurisdictions. And I'm very confident that either this month or next month, we'll have a breakthrough there where finally, after 12 years, we'll have the structure that puts together everything we've always been working for to allow for that to happen. In terms of issuing equity to non-accredited investors, our legal counsel tells that there's a way of doing that in Chapter 11. And so I believe that this incredible moment in financial history has come together where all of the reforms, all the laws and all the licenses can finally make this possible. And we can all celebrate on the other side, really over a decade of reforms that resulted from this. So all I can say about that is, fortunately, for the last few years, we've been applying for those licenses. And I never second guess regulators, but I believe we're going to have a solution, and I look forward to making some announcements there.
That sounds fantastic. Well, thank you for answering my questions. I'll step down now.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go with Liberty Lover.
Hey guys, hey Simon. Thanks, Azad. In a previous space, we had talked, I just brushed the subject just briefly on, I think you've mentioned several times that the Celsius community is what you value the most. And I brushed the subject about Bank to the Future. And I want to separate just for a moment here Celsius from Bank to the Future. Would you be willing, and I'm trying to focus on the financial bottom line for all Celsians, would you be willing to onboard Celsians into Bank to the Future because you value the community at a discount? So in other words, there's a $2,000 initiation fee to join the platform, that you cancel that, and then you give us a 50% monthly discount. If you do something like that as an incentive to show that you value the community, that could help win people over in some ways. But I'm also trying to, again, separate Celsius from Bank to the Future, and I'm trying to look at the financial bottom line for Celsians where they can diversify.
Let me cover that one, and then we'll do the other question. So let's be clear. So Bank to the Future is free to join. If you want to invest in securities, then you have to qualify as an investor through Bank to the Future Identity, BFID. And we're in the process of putting together a process for non-high net worth investors. So even if you're not high net worth, it's worth joining, because we'll message you as soon as those solutions are coming through that we've been working on for so long. We then introduced 2 additional services. So if people do it themselves, they can buy and sell crypto on Bank to the Future through our Binance broker partnership. They can buy securities through either directly through us or one of our partner brokers if they're in the US. And they can also use our secondary market. And we've been working on the final partnership integration in order to allow US investors to sell on our secondary market, which should come out at some stage next year.
That's
or
great.
buy on our secondary market as well.
Yeah, so what are the tiers that you're talking about? Because I've tried to get verified. For the life of me, I can't do it on the platform.
Yeah, unfortunately, regulators are incredibly strict. So they want us to prove your net worth. And so
so I'm not an accredited investor. I'm talking about the tiers, the tier 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Tier 1 is somebody that hasn't, they've just come to the platform and they want to buy like Bitcoin or ETH, and then they don't want to buy securities. Tier 2 is that they've self-certified as a non-high net worth investor, and they want to purchase securities, but they haven't proved their net worth yet. Tier 3 is that they have uploaded the various documents to prove that they're a non-high net worth investor. And Tier 4 that they've proven that they are a high net worth investor by uploading the documents that our regulator requires in order to make it possible.
All right, question on that for you.
We're looking to open to tier 2 by securing additional licenses and doing some securities law reforms.
Okay, so yeah, so what I'm trying to understand is the unaccredited U.S. investor. I'm U.S. unaccredited, and how to get to at least tier 2 right now, as you're talking about in terms of compliance, and then kind of position ourselves for those who are in my situation over time to kind of move up the tiers as laws change, right?
Yeah.
And so what I'm trying to get to is how can this community grow where the Celsians, if they want to remain with Celsius, their choice, that's great. But to give them an option to increase their net worth in other avenues. Does that make sense? So I want them to be able to invest in the next Kraken with you, alongside you, right?
Yeah.
So their net worth can grow, their financial education can grow, they can have financial peace in life, and they can just improve as human beings in the world, you know? So I'm trying to look out for that aspect.
Yeah. Okay. So then so that's our basic platform that we built. But then in 2020, we introduced 2 new services. One was the Retirement Plan B online wealth management program, which is an education for anybody on exactly how I build my retirement. I diversify across securities, yield, and how I separate out my spending, savings, investing, and contribution buckets, and all of the risk management and asset allocation and all the education from 20 years. Now, we would be incredibly delighted if this reorg happened and we could give everyone that type of education. It would be a service. It would be something we'd love to do. It's something we can do depending on how these reorgs go. And secondly, we created the partnership with Celsius, which led us into this situation in the first place, which is that we created a retirement plan structure and that's the service that you're talking about. It's kind of like if you go in stages, you come into our platform, you buy some crypto, and then later you buy some securities, and then you do an education. And then if you want to make a full commitment to us, you open a retirement plan with us. It's like the last stage of, I'm completely comfortable with Bank to the Future. Let's build a relationship together for the long term. And so that's the one where there's a setup fee to set up a company and the
right. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Right.
And then there's a monthly fee to maintain that. And that was the partnership we set up with Celsius. And why if you're saying we could use that as an incentive to drive people over, I think it's a great idea. And why wouldn't we do that? There's a real cost involved in it. But in these reorgs, if we can get through the reorg, we'd be delighted to try and share that journey. And just so you know, that really was Bank to the Future. We're not one of those companies like Celsius that mass marketed through affiliate marketing and stuff where everyone knew about us. We were just quietly behind the scenes because we have securities laws, marketing laws, which restrict it in terms of what we can do.
And I understand that. I guess what I'm trying to get to is optionality, because certain Celsians, they don't want to stay with Celsius, which is fine. Other Celsians want to stay with Celsius, which is fine. But if you give them optionality and you say, hey, good luck in a successful reorg. I'm rooting for you. I hope it can happen. But for those of you who want other avenues to diversify your investment portfolio, Bank to the Future is available.
Yeah, sure. I just don't want people to think, because we went into this to partner with Celsius, and we had to restructure because some of our funds got locked up in those retirement plans, and then we had to find an alternative solution. So we decided that the best way to progress and remove the partnership to do an acquisition deal with Salt, because we want full transparency over those numbers, the risk strategy, and everything. So that was why we decided to do the deal, and at the same time have a solution for reorg in case the streams go in that direction.
That's respectable. I understand.
Yeah, so now we have control over, understand the risk model, complete transparency on the financials, and that was the idea behind the acquisition, because the biggest mistake we made was depending on another company in order to do that piece. So that was like the thing. But yeah, if this turns out that, that's the best result, if they can turn my equity and our investors' equity into something valuable again, then great, that's what we came in for. I just don't see how it's possible.
I mean, just to speak about the amount of people that can, I guess it advice, but if you have 300,000 Celsians and only a tenth of them join your platform, that's going to be better for your bottom line too, right? So it's a business. It's business at the end of the day, I understand.
Yeah, and everyone, if we get our reorg, everyone will also be a shareholder, so everyone benefits. So
right.
That's what.
So I appreciate the discussion. I don't want to stop others from asking questions, but I look forward to more discussion, Simon. It's a lot of fun, and I thank you.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah. Hey, Simon, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you well.
Awesome, appreciate that. So first
Who
off,
are you?
I'm doing well. First off, man, just wanted to thank you for everything you're doing for the community. I've been listening to all the AMAs, and your approach helped us stay level-headed. So thanks. With that said, I'd like to switch gears a little bit. Forgive me if you've addressed this already. I joined a little bit late. So with all the community-led plans, I'm sure you've seen them all over Twitter, like Otis's Cell Token First, for example. Now that the CFO of Celsius has essentially filed to declare the Celsius stock or token worthless, does that nullify, most, if not all, of those community-based recovery plans?
Yeah, not quite seeing the connection. So if I'm hearing you right, so what the Celsius co-founder did is say that his shares are worthless. So what that did is I was also a shareholder, and so were other investors on our platform. So it made it official, I guess, that those shares are worthless. Having said that, and that was for a tax write-off, obviously. But having said that, if there was a reorg that brings that equity back to life, which I don't know how it works, I'm very doubtful, and I've written it off in my mind, then that may not be the case. And so that's an interesting scenario. What was the other part of the question? So,
yes,
how it connects to the cell token, was it?
Yeah. So more specifically, just how does that relate to community-led based plans?
Okay, got you. So the community-led based plans, I think, are awesome. And so originally, when Otis came out and said, let's token and turn it into equity, my immediate response was to tell him everything that the challenges he needs to overcome, which is that it would be delisted from all crypto exchanges. And I shared some of the experience that we've been through over the years, that it could trade on a security token exchange. But in terms of Chapter 11, there's no right for claimants to share and dilute their claim across tokens who may not have a claim. So there was a distinction between those that have tokens which do have a claim and are speculating on exchanges and having liquidity. And so I just tried to add value to the plan so that they could come up with a better plan. And obviously people violently oppose this because they have their own interests and they have their own opinions about whether I'm looking out for them or I'm not. And that's perfectly natural in an environment where the CEO of this company has let so many people down. That's a natural thing. Yeah. Especially if I just come along and they've never heard of me, they don't know I've got 10 years background in this industry, and they're just skeptical through the journey that I've been through, or of the older people in the community. But then that led to another plan, which was everyone saying, okay, well, we can't do it via the cell token, but maybe we can do it via equity. And then everyone started looking at equity again, and they returned back to, okay, well, let's do an equity IPO and let the company come alive. And we believe that the cell token can come back. And then I just told them my objections. I said, I believe that if you want to do a successful mining IPO, firstly, I love that idea. It's all about the management team, and that's what will make that successful. And here's the challenges to overcome. And here's the challenges to overcome within the company. I believe that the company needs a new brand, a new company, because otherwise the lawsuits come back, new licenses so that you don't get a motion from the regulator to the plan. Addressing the fact that the token may be considered as securities in the US, And here's some ways of getting around that. It could be delisted from exchanges, turned into a security token, or you could do some of the things like we've done with Shapeshift, where you DAO it off and go for some of that. I don't think it will get through. And I think you need new management, new licenses, and new risk model. And so those that don't like the fact that I said that, they push back and they decide why they don't like that and whether I'm just pushing my self-interest.
Right.
And that's a perfectly natural process because I have disclosed my interests. I'm a creditor primarily. Depositors First was my campaign. I originally tried to help Celsius in a reorg. That didn't work because there was more to hide and they weren't willing to do the transparency. So I tried to do a bailout and then got the investors together that would do that, but they didn't get the transparency. So now we're at bail-in. And now the whole community's verged on equity, what equity is more valuable. And hopefully at the end of this, we'll just have a very clear plan. Or the alternative is we can't get our shit together and it goes into Chapter 7 liquidation.
Yeah, got that. Very good. One final quick question. With the trustee being appointed, that is obviously going to be delaying, Chapter 11 restructuring proceedings, right?
Yeah, that's one school of thought. The other school of thought is that Celsius and Kirkland, as their strategy, want to delay for as long as possible, sell off assets and try and get all the money together so that they can relaunch a mining company. And so the examiner may, speed up that process because they could shed light on certain things that people are speculating on by doing a full investigation, or it could slow things down. But I think the slowdown was the original Kirkland strategy.
Okay. All right. So this seems like a way to counteract that possibly.
It could be, yeah, because it all depends on, are Celsius and Kirkland looking to reorg as fast as possible? But I think it seems like the actions that we've seen in the public information is that they're looking to sell off assets and drag out the cash burn for as long as possible and get a mining company up and running. And may sell off everything else to try and get there. We don't know. That's just speculation based upon public information. And so an examiner may be able to reverse that process if there's things that should be disclosed to the public and creditors.
Got it. Well,
it could work either way, unfortunately.
Yeah, I get that. Well, appreciate your time, Simon. Thanks a lot for everything you're doing. Appreciate it.
No worries. All right. Okay. Questions. So how long did we do, Azad? What's the time?
We are at 7:20 now.
Okay, cool. So if anyone has another question.
I do have a question.
Okay, awesome. Sorry.
Yeah, you mentioned clawbacks and how they would support the creditors. That includes unsecured creditors?
There only are unsecured creditors. There's been no disclosed secured creditors.
Okay, so then the clawbacks would basically potentially help all creditors, so to speak. And then my second question for you is,
let me comment on that. That is just the reality. Clawbacks are designed to bring in more money for creditors, but it's just an awful thing if it goes beyond insiders.
I agree.
And it will just happen in Chapter 7. That's inevitable. So that's why I want to avoid Chapter 7. So we don't even need to have this non-insider clawback conversation.
So if there is no Chapter 7, there legally can be no clawback. Is that correct?
I don't think that's correct. No, I think there still can be. Celsius has the decision on whether they want to do clawbacks or not.
Okay. Then the next question, and I think this might help a lot of the listeners. You mentioned there are 3 scenarios: Chapter 7, Chapter 11, liquidation, and then, of course, restructuring of the company.
Slightly different. Let me clarify it. So Chapter 7 is just liquidate everything. Chapter 11 can happen in 2 ways. It could be a partial, like a mining IPO and then liquidation of everything else. Or it could be a reorg where Celsius comes back to life and creates Celsius 2.8. Or it could be a completely new company and a completely new brand
take on lots of different parts or everything, and issue everyone equity. But for example, the scenario where FTX would be paying is they just look to bid and get the assets and not share equity with anyone.
Okay, and then let's just say Chapter 7 hits. We're looking at about 50 cents on the dollar. Just to give us an idea that sounds reasonable. Does that sound reasonable?
That sounds reasonable to me. There's some big questions which need to be answered.
Okay.
Where is all the Bitcoin?
Right.
There's only 8% of Bitcoin, and then when you include WBTC, there's about 30%. So what happened to the other 70%? Some people say it was invested in mining, but that's why they did the Series B, because the Series B investors probably had, this is all public information, nothing non-public. They probably had, they invested into maybe that mining operation. I can't understand why a pension fund that's so conservative investing would become a venture capitalist to invest in Celsius. Somehow Alex managed to persuade them to do pretty impressive. There might be something secured in there in my mind, like some kind of mining operation or something that's a bit less conservative. And because they were doing an IPO, maybe it was a pre-IPO deal or something like that. But yeah, those questions all need to be answered. Where are all the missing coins and what happened? And I guess we're only going to get that answer through Examiner.
Okay, so right now, as we have it, we're looking at 30 cents on the dollar.
Sorry, no. Okay, then this comes up to another interesting case, which is payment in kind. Payment in kind, how do you execute that? I put out a tweet and everyone said I was flooding the community, but I was actually genuinely trying to get people's feedback on how you do payment in kind. Payment in kind means that if you had Bitcoin on the platform, then you get Bitcoin back with a haircut. Or if you had ETH, you get ETH back with a haircut. But why should people that have Bitcoin have less Bitcoin than people that had ETH? Because Celsius lost less ETH. It won't meet the requirement of Chapter 11, where you have to come up with the most equitable solution, most equal solution.
Couldn't they just buy back? They could trade the ETH and make everything kind of across the board 30% less. If there's more ETH, let's say there's 70% ETH, 30% Bitcoin, they can use the ETH to buy Bitcoin and then make it fit, so to speak. Is that an option?
Yeah, that's an option, but then you're essentially betting on Celsius's trading abilities, which would be a hedge fund. Is that really going to get past the process, or are they going to do that through a liquidation process if you allow Celsius to do that in a reorg? Then what about the Cell token? So what is the value of the Cell token? Some would argue that if you could withdraw the Cell token, there'd be a rush to sell and it's worthless. Others would argue that there's 3% of the supply on the market and the market's determining that price, or 7%, whatever it may be. So are we going to take a big hit on everyone else because of the Cell token balances, or is it going to be, how do you do that? So, or are everyone going to receive loads of tokens that they didn't want in the first place, or are all those tokens going to be sold off, bought back with a stable coin, and then you get a hit across the thing? So how is payment in kind actually going to work in practicality will determine the percentage that comes back if that happens.
And I like to talk in worst case scenarios because usually it's all uphill from there. So let's just say worst case scenario, we can't get our crypto in kind. We end up taking the dollar amount on the date of that they declared bankruptcy. They filed for Chapter 11. And so we're looking at what is the worst case scenario haircut we're looking at dollar value based on the information that we have out there, zero speculation.
I can't actually give you that number as a guarantee, but I can make.
Please.
I can guesstimate if this turns into an absolute disaster and the liquidation process isn't handled well, I still think you get between 30 to 50% back.
Okay.
And then the rest is what do you get with the haircut.
Okay. And then my next question is based on the three scenarios, and they're more just kind of tangential scenarios. What is the worst case scenario in terms of a timeline, reasonably speaking, based off of your experience, that people can expect to see anything?
I think the fastest outcome is, again, guessing. I haven't, just my speculation. That the trustee, the examiner finds things that are not good. The trustee takes over because there's some criminal allegations as opposed to civil allegations, and then they liquidate. I'd imagine that if that happened, it may take anywhere between Q1 next year or 2 to 4 years, because of all the disputes that will happen in between. And that's the Mt. Gox kind of process, where every time you think you're there, something new comes along, they liquidate all the assets, and then loads of people get lawyers and try and claim that they are owed more of it. And every time there's a lawsuit, it delays the actual payout, and this could go on for years. That's the Mt. Gox situation.
Okay. And so basically all the other scenarios would fall between Q1 of next year and 4 years out?
Yeah, that would be my best speculative guess. But please don't treat that as legal or financial advice.
No. So we're looking at worst case scenario, it's on the dollar 4 years from now.
Yeah, I'd be very, very, very disappointed if that's happened, but that's what I would factor into my worst contingency plan.
Okay, all right, great. I appreciate it. Thank
I'm
you.
sorry if that's depressing, but that's the worst contingency.
Listen, yeah, no, information, whether it's depressing or not, is irrelevant. It's information, and it allows people to potentially hedge or plan based on that. So, no, I appreciate.
Yeah, one thing I really want everyone to do is mentally lose this money in your head and plan accordingly. Then expect the best, but prepare for the worst. Is the deal here?
Yeah, I agree. I think if you can mentally kind of push this money away, then if anything comes back to you, it's a bonus, and it's a happy payday. So yeah, I agree with that. That's why I'm looking for worst case numbers as well, just in case people cannot ultimately give up the entire idea of having lost their entire life savings. What is a worst case scenario that they could potentially hang on to?
I don't think. Yeah, in my opinion, I don't see a scenario where everyone's lost all of their life savings here. It's just a question that they're locked up, and let's figure out the best solution to get you at least. I mean, you could sell your claim right now for 25 cents, I believe, on the dollar. So you could, if you really want out. I'm not suggesting anyone should do this, but if you need liquidity and you're willing to you just want to get the hell out, there are secondary markets where someone else will buy your claim because they believe that they could recover more and they're willing to wait or able to wait.
And these guys are super professional. They've got algorithms that are being run, information that we don't have. And if they feel like they can make a profit off of your 25%, I agree with Simon. You shouldn't do it unless you absolutely need that liquidity right now.
Yeah, and I can't judge that because some people are in a liquidity crisis, and that's why. These investors are willing to take risk. They're taking risks. It's just an unfortunate marketplace for those that are in sticky positions and those that can wait.
And last question is for the court hearing. When is the next hearing where we're actually going to hear some substantive information about what the plan is or what Celsius is planning on putting forward? Do we have that information?
Yeah, we don't know the answer, but every 2 weeks approximately there's a hearing. Plan C, do you know what the next dates are? I think there's 14th is a date, isn't it?
Yeah, I believe it's the 14th, the next one.
Okay. All right, great. I appreciate your insight. Thank you, Simon.
Yeah, we'll do. Make sure you follow Plan C because he's doing lots of spaces around these key dates, and we'll also do some. So the beauty of this is that we're all informing each other, and as a community, we're understanding all these options together. Because imagine if you were doing this on your own, we'd all be lost, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also nice to throw out the best case scenario also, which is, you get a haircut on your crypto and then the equity in the next bull market exponentially outperforms your Bitcoin or your cryptocurrency investment, and you're either able to cash out or go into the market and buy additional crypto as well. I think that's also a reality, maybe not as reasonable as the ones we've discussed, but that is also a palpable reality, I believe.
Yeah, and I want to be ultra careful because that is really high risk, high return option, and that's what Bank to the Future was built upon. But we did that with Bitfinex, and so there's a possibility we can do the same again. And that's all I'm saying, that you could end up with a claim, some equity in a mining IPO that maybe in 2 to 3 years does really well, and equity in a company that ends up building a really compelling vision, maybe that does another IPO. So if you've got a 5-year game plan in this, there could be short-term liquidity plus a long-term high risk, high return investment. And we could all be celebrating on the finish line in 5 years' time, saying, thank God that happened. It was a really disastrous situation, one of the most stressful moments of my life, but we did it. That is a possibility.
Now, if there is a hole and Bank to the Future is part of the answer or the solution, how are you intending to provide the creditors with equity in the Celsius mining company versus equity in Bank to the Future?
Yeah, that's non-public information. Can't answer that one, unfortunately.
All right. I thought I'd ask it, but thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we'll go with Crypto CJ.
Hey guys, thanks a lot. Simon, thanks again for doing these spaces. It's been very, very educational. I've been a fan of yours, both your YouTube channel and the Bank to the Future channel for some years. Registered on the platform quite some time ago, and I'm just excited for the future. I'm really excited for what you have in store with Salt Lending. I think it's going to be phenomenal, and I'm really looking forward to learning more about it. There was the spaces, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 Twitter spaces ago, there was some mention of Abra Global, and I believe the Celsius loan guy mentioned some talks and discussions, and you seemed very optimistic about that. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, sure. So Sean's here. We're 100% committed to our partnership with Salt. And we're very deep in making something really special together. At the same time, we're very used to dealing with certain conflicts of interest. So we're a shareholder in over 100 companies in the industry at Bank to the Future. So one of the companies that we raised finance for was Abra. And they have a crypto lending solution. And I believe the crypto loans special interest group is looking to find a new home for those loans. So to get the best deal, they want to put it out to all the different players that could be involved in that. As I said, our commitment is depositors first. And if this motivates Sean and us to put together the best solution with Bank to the Future plus Salt Lending, then we're highly motivated to do that. And if we can't put together the best solution, then it will go somewhere else. But we're all highly motivated to put together a great solution. We're Salt and Bank to the Future are committed to doing whatever we can to put together a great solution. Abra would maybe be someone else that wants to play that game as well.
Yeah, and another thing, just real quick, I'm also very encouraged by you being willing to take the time to continue to educate people on the benefits of securities. And like you said earlier in the spaces, I think in the end, we're going to have more people that are better informed about the value there, and realizing that you shouldn't feel helpless because of antiquated investor, accredited investor laws or policies. And I see more and more platforms looking to do more things for non-accredited investors, and kind of turning around in terms of thinking and in terms of access and equal access. So I really do appreciate Bank to the Future and what you guys are doing.
So, there's just to give you a few insights. There's rules around Chapter 11 around issuing equity. Now, obviously, it may require us to end up being a public company in the end, and there could be a whole process for that, which would mean inclusion of US accredited, depending on how that's done. There is also the ability for, if you own shares, that you're able to, you can hold them for 1 year, and then you're able to sell them to an accredited investor. So there's options, and then there's the whole thing of doing many of the reforms that we pushed in the US, like Jobs Act and Reg A Plus and Reg CF. They're very, very convoluted and not quite as good as the reforms that happened in other jurisdictions like the UK. But all I'm saying is that our goal from day one has been to be inclusive as possible, and the only reason we might not be inclusive is when law prohibits us. So we'll be pushing the barriers, and unfortunately, you have to be patient with us because sometimes these things would take longer. But as long as you have, and we'll have a transparent conversation of telling you here's what we're trying to achieve, and here's the hurdles, and here's the solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really looking forward to whether it be next month or the following month, whatever new updates you might have with Salt Linen. Thanks for letting me share.
I appreciate it.
Hey, Simon, you mind if I throw something in there?
Yeah, who's that?
Tim?
Hey, Tim.
How you doing? Quick, this one, I'm sure Simon approves it, and everyone has mentioned, we appreciate it. As far as the Celsius loans, I mean, I still keep getting emails, and friends of mine keep getting emails on paying back the loan, which is laughable, but I'm sure it's just an algorithm that sent out, like a bot sent out, pay your loan, whatever. How do you think the loans will pay out, say, versus collateral? Say, for instance, 6 Bitcoin in holding and collateral, 50,000 in loan. Is that going to be treated as a separate entity? Is there any way that, hey, you owe us DK, you have 6 Bitcoin worth 127,000, and we're going to do some type of subtraction to pay your loans back? Or do you think they'll actually have a spot where you'll be able to pay your loans back?
So I did give some speculation on this in the beginning when the Celsius loans came on. But there's multiple scenarios, and I don't have a magic wand to figure out which one's going to happen. Because
right.
But you could end up with haircutted collateral and some equity collateral. You could end up with a successful bid that pays off all that full collateral to be there and compensates the earn. Or you could end up with some magic scenario where Celsius pulls a rabbit out of a hat and figures out how to structure everything and reopen.
Okay.
Yeah. So unfortunately, I know the possible scenario, which one's going to happen.
Yeah, and even is there even maybe another scenario where the lending platform would possibly continue, but you would just keep making your loan payments if you decided to let you go? You could just keep my collateral, keep my loan payment. That's going to go along.
Yeah, unfortunately, we got a really bad connection. I couldn't hear quite much of that.
Oh, so is that any better now?
I can hear you right now, but it was just in and out where we couldn't hear nothing.
But I'll say real quick, any scenario where you believe that the loan and the interest just stays in with making your payments, and they come up with some type of plan where, you keep the collateral, keep making the payments, and just continue on. And would anybody possibly, I say, buying the loan book and continuing the process with the Bitcoin being held in collateral, and you continue to make the loan payments? Do you see any scenario with that happening?
Yeah, that would be our ideal position, that we can do. There's some kind of reorg where those customers can find a new home. It all depends on the collateral, and there's no public information on the makeup of that collateral. So if I were you, I'd be lobbying the UCC to give some transparency on the makeup of the collateral in coordination with the Crypto Loans Group, who I think has got his hand up if he wants to say something.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. And Tim, you bring up an absolutely good point. I get DMs, every couple days from people that are getting emails from Celsius that are saying, your loan matures in a month. Please wire in your principal amount.
That's the one I just got.
Yep,
just got. Yep.
And Tim, that to me is just, it's super frustrating, and it doesn't show a good faith effort on behalf of Celsius. Granted, they do have we're in a Chapter 11 disclaimer, but for any normal retail loan user that really isn't dialed in spaces, isn't following on the goings of the case, they might see that email and think, yep, my principal is due. Okay, I'll wire in the money. And that to me is just, it borders on a level of insanity. But
Absolutely, absolutely. Not to interrupt, but absolutely, exactly what you just said. If I didn't have these Twitter Spaces and follow Simon back when I did about a month and a half ago, and myself and others, I would be in the same. I mean, I wasn't regardless because I knew with the Chapter 11, I knew what was going on. So I mean, why would you pay if you're not going to get the crypto? So I've emailed back many times saying, okay, well, give me some transparency. If you're asking me for this collateral, give me the reason why I can't take it out. It makes absolutely no sense for any debtor to send in money if you don't even, I mean, at least being able to move it from earn to, move it, touch it, do anything with it. I'm sure they've gotten millions of dollars back if in not be, in lost money, potentially lost money. So I see that being some type of fraud that should be brought up by UCC, you would think.
And Simon, what I'll just speak to what you mentioned exactly is there absolutely needs to be some discovery to figure out a full, true accounting of where coins, where are the collateral, and everyone does say, all of the coins are blocks per the 341 hearing and the U.S. trustees questioning of the CFO, Chris Ferraro, but there has been we're however many months now into this bankruptcy, and we still don't have basic information. We're working with the UCC, we're working with White and Case, with Celsius, Kirkland and Ellis, but we have to do discovery to see where the collateral is, how much is left. Yes, all coins are commingled, but what is the relationship from the coins to the LLCs? The LLCs are not commingled, and how is that going to play in bankruptcy court? So it's just for everyone that are loan users, and the reason why we really formed an informal ad hoc group is because when this happened, nobody was talking about loans. Nobody was mentioning the fact that retail loan users were on the hook owing money for a bankrupt platform. And people were not talking about what would happen if I paid off my retail loan, my crypto collateral gets released to my earn account, and then there's whatever percentage haircut. For that to happen, it might not even make sense for me to pay off my loan. So we are just looking as a group for clarity on where the crypto collateral is, how much is left, and then exactly like Simon and Sean are working, the potential for capital infusion and people want to adhere to the terms of their loans. Some people have large loans with large principal balances that are not necessarily in a position to pay off their loan right now, but they want to just continue paying their interest to a platform that can accommodate them. So there's tons and tons of solutions that can happen. We just want loans to be considered going forward in this process. Thanks.
Yeah, we just need more information. So, that's been the whole thing here is getting the information that the community needs in order to support the best plan for all people. And unfortunately, that's separated into public and non-public information. And if I were in your position, I'd be lobbying for that to be public information. Okay, right. I think I'm going to wrap up fairly soon. Did anyone have any burning questions that's already here?
I have a question, Simon.
Yeah, who are you?
Hi, this is Jack here.
Hey.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you, Plenty, for organizing the EMAs. I mean, this is a high level of conversation, and we're learning a lot, much more than those other AMAs, certain AMAs by the community. I'm trying to understand the process a little bit better, Simon, and I'm sorry if I'm a little bit later in the AMA here, but it seems like we're talking about discussing different scenarios, and that you are explaining also. But it seems like we're all waiting for Celsius to come up first with a plan.
Mm-hmm.
Is there, in this process, is there also a possibility that, lots of us are fed up with Celsius, don't want anything to do anymore with the company, and I think a big part of the community, is there a scenario where an alternative plan like yours, I'm quite sure, a ready plan, that this gets known and that we can vote on this plan before Celsius comes out with a scenario?
Yeah, so the process right now is that Celsius have 120 days exclusivity on reorganization plans, and they have engaged a law firm, Kirkland, in order to represent. They've been engaged by the board, i.e., Alex is the CEO, in order to represent the interests of Celsius. Now, it could be argued that the interests of Celsius are also the interests of the board. And so that's one dynamic. And they've engaged an investment bank in order to complete and propose a reorganized transaction. They have 120 days exclusivity on that. And any costs outside normal business, they have to get court approval to spend. And so that's the current situation. Now, we're also paying from our creditor claims the UCC to represent our interest and push back on anything. Finally, there is a US trustee who is, representing the process of law and order, I guess. I'm not sure if I'm saying that in the best way. Again, you can't treat me as a lawyer. I'm just getting all this from lawyers and what the process is. And I'm also asking just as many questions as you are, and then coming back and helping you with what I'm learning. And so you have those three different interest groups. And Celsius can apply to have an extension on that 120 days. They can also apply to auction off some of their assets so they've got more money to work on their reorgs here. They can also raise finance through DIP funding that allows them to finance their operations at the expense where those DIP financiers would get preferential treatment over our claims, and it would force us to reinvest. Which is a scenario that I don't like at all.
No, but I mean, I heard that, in other EMAs that the 120 days exclusivity could be, could be, how do you say that? Could be stopped if there is another plan that already gets more support by the community or by the UCC. Is that,
yeah,
or is that?
So it's just about understanding everyone's motives. In the public information, we don't know what Alex and Celsius's motives are versus the UCC's motives versus the trustees' motives. And we're all in the game of prisoner's dilemma, where everyone acting for their own interest may end up giving one of those interest groups the result that they want. My best guess at this stage is that the majority of the community want a reorg into a different company. It's just my assessment of the situation. If you join another space, they want Celsius to come back to life, which is that particular group. It seems like a smaller group than this group, but I don't know. And then there's a bunch of people that don't and don't join Twitter spaces.
Yep.
My assessment of Celsius is that they need to serve their client. Kirkland needs to serve their client, and Kirkland are famous for removing lawsuits for those in charge of the company. So that's their game. And the UCC's game is that they need to push back on everything and make sure this goes in the directions that creditors want. And so then there'll only be one reorg plan proposed. And anyone can file a motion, whether it be the trustee, the regulators, the UCC, you as a creditor, in order to object to some of those things.
So finally, the plan that comes on the table.
Yes.
And there you can vote on. And if that is not a majority, then another plan comes on. Or
No, I
does
don't
that
think you get another
structure? So
plan. You don't get another plan, I don't think.
how is the process then that you can vote for the plan that you want, or is that not possible?
No,
I mean,
it's one plan is proposed, which is refined with the whole community, creditors, and Celsius, who have the exclusivity on it. And then the creditors would vote. Plan C, do you remember what the exact parameters of the vote are? Is it 50% number of people, but then a percentage, 75% of credits or something? Do you remember?
Yeah, I remember from what Thomas was saying, of just going off memory from what he said, you need to get, I think it's roughly around 2/3 of the dollar value, and then I think it's over half of the actual creditors. So you have to get over half the creditors. Each creditor has one vote in that case, but then there's also a dollar-weighted vote where you need over 2/3 of the dollars.
Yeah, so if you could play the game theory, if it's true of understanding everyone's motives, then you would imagine to get a release for Alex and Celsius to remove those liabilities, which means if anyone takes a claim, their liabilities and ability to sue is gone. The UCC want the best result for creditors, and someone like me believes that we've got a reorg plan and that could do better. So if we can put, if the UCC agrees that a reorg plan with a new company is better than Chapter 7 liquidation.
so Simon, sorry.
Yeah.
So that means that your organization plan has to go also through the UCC and has to also pass Celsius to.
It has to go through Celsius. Celsius have the exclusivity, and UCC can push back if they choose.
Sorry, did I lose connection?
Yeah, UCC can push back, and Aventius will lose their exclusivity, in which case the UCC can propose a plan.
Yeah, sorry, I just fell out, but I mean, just to repeat, is your plan should have to pass UCC and also Celsius approval to get on the table?
I can't confirm any non-public information, but if someone was submitting a plan, it would have to go past Celsius, and then it would have to go past the UCC.
And then we are only able to vote.
The court would have to sign off that they don't think there'll be objections and motions from regulators.
Okay. So thanks for the explanation, but hearing this, it's still a long process then, before a final plan comes on the table.
Yeah, it all depends upon Celsius's ability to sell their assets, raise additional fund, drag the process out, because they run out of money at some stage.
Yeah, and they cannot be stopped in this process. That can only be pushed back by UCC.
No, someone can file a motion to get the trustee to take over, which would normally require some kind of criminal proceedings in order to make something happen against the board's will.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for the explanation.
Again, I'm really, please don't take that as legal advice. That's just everything I'm learning from lawyers and putting together and strategy and stuff. But I could be completely wrong on some of that, so you can't rely on it. It could just a different financial result for people. So yeah, everyone has to make their own financial decisions here.
No, I was just trying to understand how these scenarios come to a final proposal and how this then gets voted upon. But yeah, so now I understand a little bit better. But so Celsius is still in the lead, and it's difficult to take them out of this position if there's no.
This is Celsius's process. If we get clawbacks, it's because Celsius does clawbacks and they decide. If we get a reorg plan, it's because Celsius it's a reorg plan. And then there's a process. They can't do different business without getting caught, and then the motions can be filed, and we're paying for the UCC in order to push back against anything. And if the exclusivity period expires, then the UCC is my understanding that they propose the plan, and then it gets voted on.
Yeah. Okay, that's clear.
It can file for extension, and that can be pushed back against, or it can be approved.
Okay, clear. Thanks very much for the explanation. I hope you keep organizing these calls every 14 days because I think it's really helpful. So thank you very much and keep up the good work.
Okay, pleasure. I'm going to do a hard stop on the hour, Zod. What's the time now?
It's 8 o'clock now. UK time.
Okay, we're not gonna let anyone else in, but we'll cover the final questions of those that are in now.
Hey Simon, can I? Or go ahead. Go ahead.
I have a question. Thank you again, Simon. Thank you for your time. I wanted to ask you, what if they appoint a trustee or examiner, and they decide, hey, they say to the judge, hey, you know something, there really was criminality here, and we think that we should pursue restitution against Alex and against the other co-founders of the company. What do you think the likelihood of that is, based on what you're seeing now, and how would that impact the ability for different parts of the business to be bought out, such as like the mining business and the loan book?
Yeah.
Can that go on while they try to? I mean, can they do both at the same time?
Yeah, this is slightly beyond my comfort level. I'd love David Adler to answer that one. But let me have a shot at it, and with the disclaimer that what I'm saying could be complete BS.
Sure.
But I believe that if there is, so in Chapter 11, you get protection from civil proceedings, but it doesn't give you protection from criminal proceedings. So whatever happens with the examiner, those criminal proceedings can happen no matter what happens. And those criminal proceedings don't really affect, other than the trustee could aggressively take over based upon those criminal allegations. That's what I think it is, but I think everything continues no matter what happens there. But I could be completely wrong, because I think I've heard stuff about the examiner slowing things down. Yeah, I'm very uncomfortable answering that question, because everything I just said could be bollocks. So.
Fair enough.
Okay. Anyone else that's up? I think Plan C say something.
Yeah.
I just wanted to speak quickly to clawbacks, just because there was a few people that had questions related to it. And one thing is, as far as my understanding, the window for insiders would be up to a year, and then if there's fraud or any criminal activity, I think they go back up to 3 years. Something that I don't think, just to play devil's advocate on some of the stuff that was said prior, one thing that I don't think is being factored into the reorg is just the fact that, you know, the industry as a whole would be like, okay, so with the clawbacks, right? If this were to happen to retail, what would be the impact of that on the centralized financial crypto within crypto, like exchange? Because this whole reorg, you need, in order for reorg to happen, right? Okay, so say the whole is filled 50% with equity and 50% with crypto in kind or whatever. That equity value is determinant on a company restructuring and having an industry where people are going to want to feel okay to put their money on that centralized place. So it's just something to consider, I think, for everyone, that, you know, in theory, if a clawback were to happen, that would affect the equity recovery of a reorg, because it would really hurt the confidence, and not to mention the negative. Think about the negative press of that new entity or that brand, and also just think about, there's actually a decent amount of YouTube influence I think would be affected. I'm assuming there'd be a lot of negative press there. So again, I think the clawback thing is very complicated. I think everyone's assuming like, okay, do the clawbacks on retail and you'll have a bigger, more assets back in the app. But the negative fallout from that within the industry, you know, there's defenses against clawbacks, but I'm just speaking from a standpoint of a reorg going forward. If you want to have an equity value fill the hole, you got to factor in the negative effects of a clawback on that equity value, because you'd lose a lot of faith in the centralized crypto industry, and not to mention the brand. Any brand associated with a clawback would be just really hurt, I think, within crypto. Just my thoughts.
Yeah, my understanding of the best defense against that is reorg into a new code, because the new code couldn't do a clawback. Only Celsius can do the clawback.
Sorry, Sam.
Okay, I reckon that's
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go for it.
So I'm a depositor. My life savings here is locked up. It's been just a horrific few months here. But Simon, first and foremost, thank you for and Plan C, everything you guys are doing for the community. I was listening to every space for weeks and weeks and weeks, and it's just exhausting mentally and emotionally. So I took a couple weeks off, but I'm back. And is there any scenario where your plan, Simon, would not make it to the table for review and serious consideration?
I can't talk about non-public information, but I can't think of a scenario where that be considered.
Okay. Do we know when this 120 days exclusivity will expire? Exactly.
I've lost count. I just don't know what day it is anymore. Do you know what it is, Fancy?
It's 120. I think it's 120 days from the day they filed, but I'm not sure what. I think when did they file? Was that
July 13th, I believe.
Yeah, so 4 from that day would, as far as my understanding, I could be wrong.
So November 17th, approximately. Have I said that right?
So July, August.
And their cash flow forecast said that they'll be down to 40 million in cash in November.
It doesn't sound like there's anything the community can do to expedite this and perhaps remove Mashinsky.
Yeah, I'm not aware of even if it would help either, because at the moment we're all in this together and we've got to figure out the best solution.
So I agree with you, Simon. I think that the majority of the community that I see all over Twitter is in support of your plan, whatever that may be. But there also is, that that pretty vocal and toxic other side that I would consider minority. Is there anything they can do to make our lives more difficult in terms of wanting to view your plan?
There's a set part of the community that think I'm the devil and that I'm evil and that I'm here to,
which
and
I don't understand whatsoever.
Well, they think I took down Celsius on purpose. I constructed, a bunch of Bitcoin maximalists in order to take the company down and speculatively attack the company, which would put me in prison. By the way, it literally would.
Well, I don't speak for anybody else, but I believe that is just lunacy to believe that. I believe you are depositors first. You have day one since your father passed. So you have my support, Simon. I'm just like, I'm waiting and waiting and waiting. And I just want to get on with it. And frankly speaking, there are a lot of people that are behind you, a lot.
Yeah, I believe so. But at the same time, I try to always see the world from other people's perspectives, and there's certain things that I believe in that might be contrary to their beliefs. At the end of the day, a community built this very strong relationship with Alex, and some of them felt that they had achieved financial freedom from nothing as a result of this service, and for that to all be taken away,
everybody was lied to. Everybody was lied to.
A percentage believe, or some people believe that Alex was attacked, and this was all, an attack on him.
Then he should have prepared for that. He should know that sort of posture throughout the crypto community. He created enemies. But the fact of the matter is, he told all of these people who are against your plan and still in support of him, that their coins were safe. Now those people can't access their coins either. So I don't know.
Yeah, there's things that I can't forgive, but maybe I want to get the best result for depositors. So that's why I said it's depositors first. So whatever needs to happen to get us as much back as possible, I will do certain time. And I get things wrong. I've been emotional at times. I've been aggressively shouting, and things outside of my character. But at the same time, I try to remain open to other people's perspectives, and just do whatever I can, and just remain I know the truth of my motives, and no one else does.
Well, you've
So
been that since
all
day
I can
one.
do is carry on doing what I'm doing. Yeah, yeah. Well, I appreciate
I
your
really hope
support.
that.
I feel like 90%, 99% of my DMs are people that appreciate the support, and there's a 1% that believe I'm trying to acquire this for pennies on the dollar, and I'm evil, and I created the attack in order to take down.
Well, please stay the course, Simon. There are a lot of people that have a
Oh,
lot of faith in
I'm
you.
brave. I'll stay the course. That's my cue. I'm here till the end.
My last question is, as I mentioned earlier, like my life, my entire 23-year career is pretty much sitting in Celsius. I can pay my bills, but my retirement, my kids' education, it's all sitting there. And I'm an accredited investor from the U.S. I don't know if that puts in any kind of different position than anyone else.
Did you have your funds moved from earned to custody?
No, sir.
Oh, because you're accredited, of course. Yeah, it was non-accredited. Yeah, so I think it sounds like you're in the earn pot with the majority.
100% in earn, correct.
Yeah, and I don't see any difference between US and non-US, other than there was US were told that they have to move from earn to custody, so that worked in their favor in the end.
What is the? So I am an accredited investor. I'm not exactly sure what that if that provides me anything different than an unaccredited investor.
No, the whole point of accredited investor and high net worth investor is that you opt in for less investor protections by the nature of your wealth, and you could afford to lose it, the SEC or the regulator's opinion. If you can't afford to lose it, then they say that you warrant additional protections that accredited investors don't have. So that's the essence of securities laws. They say, they say we protect accredited investors less than we protect non-accredited, and therefore, if you're accredited, you get access to much, much higher risk opportunities that non-accredited don't. And then the flip side of that is the higher risk, high return opportunities tend to be the ones that make people wealthy. And so therefore, they get crowded out of such opportunities. And therefore, it's a way of protecting the rich. So it's kind of accredited investor land means you get access to a lot more investments, but you get less protections from the tax that you're paying that funds the SEC.
I see. Well, if we ever get out of this mess, Simon, the things I've learned about you over the course of the last few months, I would invest in Bank to the Future and you. I think that you are you're on the right track in the Bitcoin industry.
Okay, I appreciate the support. Thank you. And I'll be there for you till the end, as I said. Anyone else before we jump off?
There's I believe it's Patro, is it?
Patroclus.
Have we had 100% male questions? Is there no females in this community?
We've had one. I believe there was another one, but they left. Not sure.
Yeah. Anyway.
Hi, Simon. I think the best thing I can do. I have all these well-crafted questions I've been jotting down for hours, is to say nothing and say thank you, bless you, and let you get on with your evening.
I appreciate that. We'll do more spaces. If you've got questions and I can help you, I am highly motivated to support the community in any way I can for the duration of this. And I've already turned my life upside down. I don't know what day it is. I don't know what time zone I'm in. I've never, spoke with so many people. And, I've just turned down because this just feels like a moment in financial history where us as a community get to do something special out of the, and there has to be a greater meaning that comes from this on the other side that we could all be a part of. And so I don't know what that is. I don't know what it looks like, but I've just got a feeling that there's this moment that we're creating, and this was part of the plan, and it's all guided. And I have faith that there is something special that comes out of this. And even if it doesn't, we're going to figure out what we do together after this, even if the worst case scenario happens. And I just got to hold on to that belief, and that empowers me to wake up early, stay up night, and put up with some of the abuse that I've had to in order to do this. So yeah.
I am truly sorry for the abuse that I've heard you take. I am not financially literate in that I entered the world of crypto in 2017, but I found good teachers, tried to follow the rules, have enjoyed the benefits. I have graduated from your class and was able to reach tier 4 approval just when this all blew up. And I am resting in the faith part, the trust part, and I accept whatever happens, but I love the supportive feeling that I'm following a good man. And bless you, and karma will give you what you deserve, and hopefully that's great job.
And one thing I would say, you call yourself you're not financially savvy. You are guaranteed at the end of this and now way more financially savvy than the vast majority of people out there in this world. So I'd put you in the top percentile of financial savviness compared to those that haven't been through this.
It's sure is painful being here, huh?
It is, yeah.
But
sometimes ignorance is bliss, right?
Yes.
My wife's name.
Geez, the wife of your wife's name, and there's your joy. So I'll shut up and go spend some time with her.
Okay,
Thank
awesome.
you, sir.
Okay, I think we're done. Speak now or forever hold your peace. We're not letting anyone else in. There was no one else, I don't think. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Our BF Lives were traditionally 1 hour. They seem to have gone on for a lot longer now. We record everything, refer back to this. If you think there's anyone else that would benefit from this, then the team relentlessly work on ripping out these things, putting them up on YouTube. Next week, we'll be doing a BF Live with Sean to share a bit more on our vision for the future of crypto lending that we're aiming to build together. And I'll also Plan C's doing various AMAs and stuff on his channels with lawyers and bankruptcy experts and myself. I'll continue to participate in those. Crypto Loans has looking out for the best interest of the loan group. There's clawback groups. I think find those groups. I think Plan C can guide you in any of those directions. And we are going to get out of this on the other side. You know the worst case scenario. You know the best case scenario. Let's make sure that we're all preparing for the worst, so we're not putting ourselves in a position where we're reliant upon these funds, but we're expecting the best, and we'll fight for it together. Thanks, everybody. Peace.